live. Welcome, everyone. Surprise, new background, something special for today. Just joining us, we got about 10 minutes before we get started. Just wanted to sign on, hang out with everybody, make sure everyone's comfortable, relaxed, either ready to cook, ready to hang out, ready to ask plenty of questions, I hope. Bella's here, say hi.
Hi everyone. There's a little bit of a delay, so I think that we're still signing on.
But I think they'll hear me in the delay.
Yeah, I think we're good.
I think we're great. So welcome everyone. Don't worry, you're not late. I'm early. Just getting set and set up here. Welcome. Someone was here even before me, all the way from Tokyo. Shout out to Chris. How we doing? Where's everyone from today? Do we have a lot of people here yet? Everybody's still joining on. We only got a handful of people here right now. That's okay. We're early.
Yes, we are early, just to make sure that everything is running smoothly.
Smoothly, no technical difficulties, hopefully no glitches.
Difficulties today.
The streaming services
Hello, Michigan.
are looking down on us. What's up, Michigan? In the house? Spring Lake. Oh, isn't MO? Oh, no, MO is Missouri.
Mela and Jess from NYC. Hello.
NYC. Where's Konawacha?
Konish. Joseph, that's hello in Japanese.
Oh. I was looking and I was like, oh, Spring Lake, Konawacha. I was like, that must be somewhere in upstate New York.
No.
Konnichiwa.
Yes. Hello.
Right?
Yes.
Forgive my accent. Hello. Greetings. Anyway,
Welcome everyone.
back to the show.
We're here early.
We're here early for everybody just joining us.
Don't worry.
Don't worry, you're not late. We still got a couple minutes. We'll say we got like 8 minutes to go. So you have time. Go run, grab yourself a beverage.
Make sure you have
feed the cat, feed the dog. Make sure he's not going to bother you during our time together. Although dogs and cats really like pasta, so they can hang out too if they wanted to. I wouldn't be upset.
North Dakota. Hello.
Welcome, North Dakota. People are slowly signing on.
You can kind of see the top of that.
Here.
Yes.
Better? I don't see it on my screen.
I can see it. Just to make it a little bit
Better?
more clear. It's still a delay, so I'll have to see.
Give it a second.
Yes. Is everybody's mise en place?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. That's better.
Great. Perfect.
We're going for the best we could do here.
Yes, everyone.
Always striving for improvement. Lots of good feedback from the last gnocchi class. If any of you all were there last time, I appreciate all of the honest feedback. It helps us get better. Very detailed ingredient lists this time. Make sure everybody has the exact amounts of everything for everybody that wants to be very precise. But I'm still going to obviously cook as I like to cook and eyeball things because I've been doing this long enough. But I know it is helpful to have the exact amounts of ingredients as you are still gaining your footing and confidence in the kitchen. But that's what this is all about. Cooking together, being comfortable, improving. I'm improving still every day. I learn new things. I still like look up to other chefs and see what they're doing and read cookbooks and constantly trying to educate myself because there's an endless amount of knowledge out there. And I think as soon as you think that you're done learning and there's no more room for improvement, you've hit a wall. It's really sad when I see other cooks and chefs that think they know it all. Because I know I don't know it all. And you'll never know it all. I constantly want to know more and learn more. And I think that's like one of the things that like allows me to keep cooking every day is because there's so many things that I could continue to learn and improve upon where it's like I just want to keep getting better. And that's why we're all here today.
Hi from Boston and Red Bluff, California.
Red Bluff.
And New Hampshire.
Where's Red Bluff? Do you know where Red Bluff is?
Like, California's very big. I'm not sure.
California's huge. They say California could be its own country. I don't know about that.
It's pretty big.
It's big. It's big enough for sure. I just don't know about the logistics of it.
Yeah. I mean, this Rhode Island's its own state, and it's the size of Los Angeles. So.
This is true.
Anything is possible, Chef.
Anything is possible.
From Tahoe.
Welcome everyone just joining us. We still got a couple minutes. Don't worry, you have time. We're early. We're just making sure all of the technical difficulties are out of the way. Things are going to be flowing nice and smoothly as we get through cooking. We're going to have lots of pasta today. Hopefully nobody's planning on making all of the pastas like I am, because then you'll just have like a ton of pasta, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but it'd be better to choose one or two, cook those, and then make the other ones later, so that way you have fresh pasta. Unless you're like meal prepping, and you're like one of those meal preppers with all the containers, and you just had like 8 different pastas ready to go for like the next 8 meals, and all you ate was pasta. Possibility.
Greetings from Mexico and Connecticut.
Mexico and Connecticut.
Yay.
Shout out. Mexico, the country.
Yes, and then Connecticut State. Chef.
Connecticut State.
Yes.
Man, we are getting our geography workout today. I love it.
And Red Bluff is 3 hours north of San Francisco.
Oh, okay. So like you're near Ukiah and what else is up there? Ukiah, Reading. That's the word I was looking for. Ukiah and Reading. I spent some time in Ukiah right after college. One of my first jobs in a real restaurant was in Ukiah. The restaurant's no longer there. Don't worry. No one needs to go searching out for it. But it was a good year introduction into the industry.
Before going to Michelin-starred restaurants.
Yeah, it was my very first job out of college. Thank you, Bella. So everybody's got to start somewhere.
Yes, Chef. Yes,
You know?
exactly. Yes. We have a little bit of a different scenery today.
Yeah, different scenery. If you're familiar with and have been to these classes before, oh my gosh, where are we? What's going on? Totally different. I wanted to have a stove behind me so I could keep water boiling and then cooking the sauces up here to keep the flow going better rather than trying to boil water and cooked sauces and everything all off of one induction burner, which would have been really hard and kind of like slow down the pace of the class. It would have been maybe a little choppy. I don't know. Just seemed to make a little more sense to bring everyone out of the pasta lab and into the kitchen here so that way we can actually cook on the stove. Crazy, right? This is probably a one-time thing. So if you're here for this, like, we're gaining that much more closeness to each other. Like, you're in my home now. Like, this is real life. So, super exciting stuff. Keep this between us. We don't need to go telling everybody, you know? This is our little secret. Yes? Was that a question?
Yeah, there's a question already. Should we start boiling water?
Yes. Start boiling water. I was going to start everyone off with that. If you're planning on making pesto, you'll need 2 pots of water. One to cook your pasta and one to cook your pesto. I like to cook my pesto. We'll get there. But a little pot and a big pot. You don't need a giant pot. This is deceptive. We'll talk about it. But the water is only like up to like here. Not all the way up to here. The reason being is that less water is actually better for cooking pasta, contrary to some weird rumor or myth that someone put out there long ago saying you need a giant witch's cauldron of water in order to cook pasta, which is entirely untrue. The starchier the water, the better. You just need enough room in the pot for the pasta to move around nicely. So, don't go crazy, not too big of a pot, couple quarts of water, that's all you need.
But you'll repeat that again?
Yeah, as soon as we get started. We're jumping ahead. It's all right. That was like bonus material. Those are like the outtakes, you know?
B-roll.
B-roll. Now, B-roll is like beautiful. Is that what B-roll stands for? Beautiful roll? And it's just like beautiful images of things?
Perhaps, Chef. We'll have to look that one up later.
Yeah, I'm not in the know in that. For some reason, I think that's wrong. A-roll is probably like the prime things you use, like footage you use, and B-roll is like not, because B is the next letter in the alphabet.
Okay, Chef, we are now 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Sorry, I got completely off track there. Welcome, everyone. As we get started, if you're just joining us for the first time, thank you for being here. If you're a repeat pasta party people, thank you for coming back. I appreciate all of you. And I'm excited to be inviting you all into my home today. We have Bella in the chat room. I'm not actually chatting. It says there we go. It says my name, but that's actually her. Feel free. This is interactive. This is real time. This is live. So jump into the chat room, ask questions, stop us throughout. Bella's going to relay all of those questions over to me. If we're not answering your question right away, it's probably because we're waiting for like a gap, so that way I'm not just cooking and stopping and cooking and stopping, and it makes a little more sense, right? I think we should be good on technical difficulties. This is being recorded right now, and a new link will go out once this is uploaded afterwards later tonight for you to rewatch. If I start going too fast or too crazy, you should be able to pause it and then continue watching it right now in real time. If you need to take a break, that's totally fine. Don't forget, very important, take lots of photos as you're cooking, as we're hanging out. Post them on Instagram, tag me at chef.joe.sasto. They say food doesn't taste as good if you don't take a picture first. I don't know if they actually say that. I don't know if that's true, but why risk it, right? Just take that photo. I want to see what everybody's making. I get inspired when I see everyone posting all of the things from our little workshops together. It's fun. So I want to be able to reshare all of those with the rest of the world. As we get started here, we're focusing on sauces, back to basics, right? This is a class I put together due to popular demand. Everybody's been learning how to make pasta with me over the past 8-9 months now.
Yeah.
Right? That's a long time. And then a lot of people are to that point where they feel very comfortable making pasta, but they're running out of what to do next. Oh my gosh, I made pasta, but then what? And the idea is that pasta is one thing. It is the marriage of the noodle and the sauce, the two coming together as one. So you have all these noodles, but then what do you do with it? I wanted to go into the history, revisiting a lot of the classics, some of my favorite sauces, and seeing that evolution of kind of how you can take a couple of simple ingredients, treat them differently, and end up with a wide variety of results depending on how you're feeling, what you're in the mood for, and what you have in your pantry. So that being said, if you checked out the recipe page, you'll see there's about 7 or 8 different sauces on there. The ones that are grouped together will be cooking together as one. So you can see there'll be like a divergence partway through that recipe where the cacio e pepe becomes Ligriscia, the amatriciana could become arrabbiata, the pomodoro de oro could become alla vodka, and so on and so forth. So if you plan on making 1 or 2 sauces in real time today, pick those out. Cook along with just those. You don't need to be cooking along the entire time. You could ask questions, you could take notes, and you can refer back to this at any time. That being said, the other note on there is pork products. Most of these recipes, all classically, traditionally, historically, call for guanciale, which is a pretty specific cut of pork. It is a pork jowl, and it's cured, usually salt, pepper, sugar, sometimes some other spices like rosemary or herbs in there, but it's often hard to find. It's sometimes expensive. When you're in Italy, it's everywhere. It's the most common thing, almost like bacon. Here in the US, around the rest of the world, it's not as easy to find. So in the recipe, I put some substitutions. Not all pork is created equally, and some pork products would lend better to different dishes depending on the way they treat it or how they are. So while you should or could use guanciale in all of these, we're going to sub that out across the board. So starting first, if you missed it already, you're going to need a pot of water on the stove, obviously, to get your pasta cooking. Don't worry about it being filled all the way up. This is a really big pot. I just used the big one, so that way if there's room for starchy water to build up. But the starchy water is only about down to here. Only a couple quarts of water. That's really all you need. I have another small pot in the back with water. That's on low. That's going to be for my pesto. So if you plan on making pesto, you need 2 pots. If you're not making pesto today, just the one for cooking the pasta. Then over here, we have all of our ingredients lined up and ready to go. We're going to start with cacio e pepe and Ligriscia. Cacio e pepe, probably, you could say, maybe, I don't know, one of the oldest Roman pastas. Very simple ingredients. And when you're talking about a lot of these, they're all really simple. There's very few ingredients in these classic sauces. And one of the things to keep in mind and remember is because there's such few ingredients, you really want to do what you can to seek out the best quality of all those ingredients. You don't want to use pre-ground Parmesan cheese. That's the SAN. You don't want to use the Romano cheese. You want real Pecorino Romano. You want real Parmigiano Reggiano, because the flavor difference is incredibly noticeable. And since you're only using 2 or 3 ingredients, if you're not using very good ones, the dish is going to kind of fall flat. You're going to take a bite and you may be like, oh, I don't get it. Why does everybody love cacio e pepe so much? And yeah, it is adult mac and cheese, but it's really the singing and harmony of those ingredients together, the good versions of them, that really make the dish special. So our cacio e pepe, they say it's a shepherd's dish, sheep herders. Cacio is like the Roman dialect for Pecorino Romano. It doesn't actually mean cheese, it means cheese, but specifically Pecorino Romano cheese, which is a sheep's milk cheese made similar to how they make Parmigiano, just from sheep instead of cow. It's a little saltier, it's a little more pungent. The traditional version of this dish obviously would use only Pecorino cheese. I like bringing in a little bit of Parmigiano because I think it kind of balances out more nicely, which kind of opens up the door for me to insert a disclaimer here for any people living in Italy or Italians out there that are like, oh my God, that's not the way to make it. I hear you. I'm not trying to tell people that this is the only way to do these dishes. What I'm telling them is this is how I like to do them, how I have researched, I have tested, I have learned, I've educated myself, and now I'm taking the liberty to say, hey, this is what I think is best. Not necessarily maybe the best, but what I think is best. And you then can use this and be the judge. So that's why I am going to take some of my own liberties here, and I'm not discrediting any of the other ways to make any of these dishes by any means. I just want to get that out there. Disclaimer, right? So, cacio e pepe, similar to Lagrisha. Both cheese, pasta water, black pepper. Super simple. The Lagrisha would bring in the guanciale, that porkiness, that fatty pork product. I'm going to use some country ham, that like thick cut stuff you would like put on Eggs Benedict. Cut into like nice lardones here, which are kind of like 1-inch rectangles is like a lardone, not a dice. I like that longer square kind of cut. I think it works better there.
Does it have a lot of fat in it?
Country ham?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ham, it's pork product, emulsified sausage. There's fat in it. I mean, guanciale probably has the most fat of any of these pork products. That's why it works well in all these dishes, because you render out all that fat, and that fat becomes the base of the sauce. Fat is flavor. But the country ham is probably leaner than guanciale.
Great. That answers one question. So.
Great. So starting here, I'm going to get my pan on medium-low heat. One of the biggest secrets, if you want to call it a secret, when you're making cacio e pepe or Lagrisha is freshly ground black pepper. Hopefully that goes without saying, but dry toasting it in a dry pan. So nothing in the pan here, no oil, no butter, no water, nothing but just our cracked black peppercorns. This is a step that cannot be replicated, it cannot be cheated, and it's something that needs to be done right before you're making the dish. In that dry pan, over medium-low heat, we're toasting and opening up those peppers, and that dry roast and toast on our peppercorns is really the kind of secret to opening up a whole different spectrum of flavor when you're talking about peppercorns. If you have like that crazy blend of like 4 or 5 different color peppercorns, that's kind of fun to use here as well, as a little disclaimer. So low heat, not too high, very slow kind of toast here. We're going to come back and we're going to season our pasta water to get things going for the day. We don't need a lot of salt. If you've taken a class with me before, you know pasta water should not be as salty as the sea. Please stop saying that. Please stop doing that. Pasta water, for reference, we're actually going to get scientific here. For reference, seawater is about 3% salinity, which is incredibly high. Pasta water should be about 1% salinity at the most. You go up to 2 if like you really want it salty, but you can even go a little less, like 0.5%, and that's like by volume. No, I'm sorry, by weight. So if you have 2,000 grams of water, 1% is 20 grams of salt. I think that math is right. Not a mathematician, but I want to say that's correct. which comes to about a tablespoon a quart, give or take. So I'm just going to season my pasta water back here so it's ready for me. Turn up my heat. And you don't want the pasta water too seasoned because then you can't use it to emulsify your sauce, which is a very important part and step in all of these dishes. I have my toasty peppercorns. You can start to smell them. That's a really good sign. And then I'm going to drop my dried pasta in the water back there. Okay, I'm using fusilli, which is like a spirally kind of pasta. Reminded me of mac and cheese. Since that's kind of like a fancy version of what we're doing here, I thought it'd be fun. Are we good?
Just before you move on, there's a couple people in a different link that wasn't correct. So I think.
Are they joining now?
I believe they're joining now. There's about 30 people on a link that was sent, but are holding pattern.
That's weird. Where are they?
I think in a different link. I'm not sure.
Let's take a moment and see if we can help those people out. If you're with us, just a sec. Let's see if we can find where everyone is. That's weird. How did you find that out? Someone messaged you?
Yeah, someone just told me in the chat.
But nobody knows who those people are or how they got there?
The original link was not correct. There's about 30 people on a link that was sent but are in a holding pattern. I just copied and pasted the link in the thread.
That's weird.
Chef's Feed sent out the wrong link.
Chef's Feed sent out the wrong link. Thanks, Chef's Feed.
Oh.
I don't know, because I sent out a link Friday morning, I think yesterday, this morning, a couple hours ago, that it was all the same one. I don't know what other link they could have. Let's give it a second and figure this out.
Yeah,
I feel bad for everybody.
Let's pause for everyone.
We're pausing.
You could.
If you're with us, turn your peppercorns off so they don't burn. You're good there, and we're holding. We're trying to figure out where the other half of our pasta people are.
We do have some questions, but I will get to those as soon
Yeah, we'll
as
pull the questions up later.
we figure out where everybody is. So unfortunately, Chef's Feed had sent out an incorrect link. You all should have received the email that was sent out this morning as well with the correct link.
Yeah, Friday. It's okay. Let's go on Chef's Feed and see if we can find all of our pasta friends.
While pausing, can you tell us, should we salt the amount of water for the pesto?
No salt in the pesto water.
No salt in the pesto water. If you're listening.
Hey everyone.
Yes, everyone should be using the link from the email. Perfect. The people from the other link have been redirected here. Excellent. Thanks everyone for helping out. We appreciate it.
Yeah, you guys are all awesome.
Yeah. If you've taken any of our classes before, that's never happened. So I'm not sure.
We're just gonna blame. I mean, clearly
I'm-
Chef's Feed is.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing over there. That's why, if you noticed, actually, this is the first week we're on my YouTube channel versus the Chef's Feed channel, which maybe Chef's Feed didn't like, and that's why they sent out a link to their channel. I don't know. But we're here. I think everyone's slowly joining in. If you're just joining us, you didn't miss much. We're just getting started. You'll see the recording of this later, so you could catch up the first 5 minutes or so. If you missed, I apologize. Something happened with Chef's Feed. The wrong link was sent out. I thought I sent out the right one the past 3 days, once a day, but obviously that's a lot of emails to be checking, and not everyone checks their emails that often, I know. So we should be good now. I think we're back. Are we ready to go?
Once everyone's moving over.
We'll give everyone 1 more minute to join.
And once everyone's here,
Once everyone's
just
here,
a nice little reset for everyone.
yeah, it's so much fun. So it looks like there's still 16 people in the other 15 now.
Great. So everyone's
That's
moving
good.
over.
Slowly, people are welcome. Welcome, everyone. Come on in. Come on. Right this way. Here we go. It's all right. Somehow you ended up at the wrong place. You're in the right place now. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Everyone can get themselves a glass of wine.
Yeah, everyone else is here.
Kick
You're
back.
not late. Someone gave you the wrong directions. I don't know who that is. I can't speak for Chef's Feed, unfortunately. I can only speak for myself. I'm going to continue to spam the new link to the other chat room just to make sure everyone understands where we are now. All right. I think there's still 15 people in the other room. Something tells me they're not in front of their computer. And so we could probably get right back into things.
So let's answer just a few questions. While we're waiting, can you explain why you can't use the pasta water for sauce if it's over seasoned? Does the salt break the emulsion?
No, that's a good question. Though the way you're thinking about it is kind of like, let's think about first, starchiness is going to help create an emulsion. So you need that starchy water to create a stable emulsion. The saltiness will limit how much of that salty water, if your water is salty, it will limit how much starch from that water you can bring in, because you can only add so much water before something becomes too salty and over seasoned. So by under seasoning your pasta water no more than 1% by weight, then you could add more of that starchy cooking water without risking over seasoning your final dish. So it doesn't have to do with breaking the emulsion. It's actually you wanted more of that water, more of that starch to create a more stable emulsion, which you can't do if you have very salty water like the ocean. So we're not seasoning our water like the ocean ever again. We're never going to use that phrase. We're all going to tell all of our friends. We're going to say, don't season pasta water like the ocean anymore. That's way too salty, guys. Now we all know. Any other questions before we jump back into things?
What if we're using fresh pasta?
If we're using fresh pasta, same thing. You want that starchy water. You're just not going to cook it as long. It's going to be a shorter cook time. You can probably use even less water because it's going to cook in the water for a less amount of time. So you don't need to bring as much water to the boil in order to get that starchy water. Some of these I actually have fresh pasta we're going to cook with. For this one, I'm using dried. A great thing to talk about right now, since we are talking about dried pasta, is that not all dried pasta is created equal. A lot of people think you can make dried pasta at home, which you can, but you really can't. Because good dried pasta is dried under very specific temperatures over a long period of time. So it dries evenly, it dries from the inside out rather than the outside in, which then makes a very stable product. It's not going to go bad. It's not going to fall apart when you try to cook it. It's not going to take a really long time to cook. And the people that make dried pasta do it very well. They import it. And there's nothing wrong with buying dried pasta, especially if it's imported from Italy, because they do a really good job over there at making dried pasta. One thing to note that I always thought was interesting when you're looking at dried pasta is actually the lighter colored and paler your pasta looks, the better it is. That means that it was dried at a lower temperature for a longer period of time. If you find dried pasta that's like bright yellow and almost like looking like fresh egg noodles, that's actually a sign of it not being a very good dried pasta, because it was dried very quickly and almost too efficiently, to the point where it just kind of set all of those enzymes, but your texture is going to be kind of not as good as it could be when you go to cook it. Fun facts, right?
Yeah, I do have another question just before we get started. Restarted again.
Yeah, we're getting restarted. Welcome everyone. Welcome back.
This is for Emily. How much pasta should we be making for each recipe? So, as I mentioned, I'll say it again for everybody that just joined us. If you look at the recipe page
we're not cooking through. Sorry, let me make sure my screen is up so I can see what you see. We're not cooking. I'm going to be cooking through everything, but you don't need to cook through everything. That's a lot of pasta. You'll end up with 8 giant bowls of pasta. Way too much unless you're meal prepping, but in either case, you should just make fresh pasta because it's better. So about one of these deli containers here, this is 2 cups, half a quart, is 1 large portion, 2 regular smaller kind of portions. It's about 6 to 8 ounces here in a 2 cup thing. Obviously you can't convert size measurements to weight measurements as easily, but it just depends on how much you want to eat. Are you having lunch? Are you having dinner? Are you having some steak to go with this? Are you having a salad? Are you cooking some bread? Serving sizes are very arbitrary. I don't like using them, and so rather I just gave an amount that'll make sauce for about 2 to 4 people, depending on what else that you're eating with the dish. I hope that clears things up. If not, I'll clarify further. Just hit me up in the chat.
Yeah.
Right?
Are you ready to begin again?
Yes, so we're beginning again. We're starting with cacio e pepe and Ligriscia. Both of them, you need to have your dry pan peppercorns toasted. We're using freshly cracked black pepper in a pan, medium-low heat, just till you can start to smell the peppercorns in the pan. I'm going to add my pasta to my pan back here. Boiling water that we lightly seasoned, about 1% salinity. The ocean is 3% salinity. Those 2 extra points is a huge difference when you're talking about salt content. Let me grab a timer here just so I can watch and tell what's going on. Our peppercorns in the pan now. After you get that dry toast on them, there's no way to replicate that dry toast. You can't do it in advance. You want to do it as close to when you're making pasta as possible. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of olive oil. Some people say there's no fat in cacio e pepe other than the cheese, but I like the oil, especially since we're going to kind of converge this into Ligriscia. And I think it's important that you get a little bit of fat. That'll kind of open up those peppercorns even more. It'll allow them to get toasty. And then it'll give something for that country ham that we talked about to kind of render out and crisp up it. Then you get the flavor of that to kind of work through the entire dish. So we're back here over medium heat. My pan is heating up. Peppercorns are getting toasty. We're going to go with our rectangle cut lardones of this country ham. We talked about, if you missed it, guanciale is what you would normally use, but obviously it's not that accessible, and you would need a lot of guanciale to cook through all of these. So I thought it'd be fun to show some other pork products you could sub in and out for these dishes. If you go to Italy, there's actually like butcher shops called nocinerias, which only serve pork products. They deal exclusively in pork. They do salamis and cured meats and just celebrate the pig, which I thought was pretty cool. You know, you wouldn't find a specialty butcher shop like that anywhere here in the U.S., but pork is king in Italy. It's something they've been raising very well for a long time.
I do have a question. How should we keep our fresh pasta from drying out while we wait for the sauces we're making?
So fresh pasta, if it dries out on the counter, just like while we're waiting for the sauces to cook, that's not drying out too much. What I'm talking about, like when you don't want to dry out fresh pasta, is like try to get it dried on the counter to where it's like cracked and store in like the cabinet, like dry pasta from the box. If it just sits out, it's not going to over dry. You're totally fine. If you're worried about it, you can set it in the fridge with like a towel draped over it, but on the counter it's going to be totally okay. So I'm getting crispy bits on all of our ham here, toasting up in those black peppercorns. A little bit of that olive oil in there is helping pull out some of the fat from the ham. And I like a little bit of crispiness around the edges. And now the addition of the ham here is where we've kind of diverted into Ligriscia. If you wanted to keep this in cacio pepe world without the addition of the pork, you would add the olive oil and then you would stop. Wait for your pasta to finish cooking and then jump right back in here with us. I always thought it was interesting that the two dishes are so similar, and you'll see that as we cook through the rest of this, that a lot of these different sauces all really kind of intertwine, and you can see almost where the first version of it came from and how then the rest became what they are. So we're getting crispy here on our ham. black pepper. I'm going to check on my pasta behind us. It's been in the water for 3 minutes. Give it a little stir just to make sure nobody's sticking. And if you missed it, it looks like I have this giant pot back here. It's not giant. There's only like yay water in it. I just wanted a big pot because sometimes when you're boiling pasta water over and over and over again, it gets really starchy, and that starch will actually bubble up. And if you're not careful, it'll come out over the top of your pot. Most people at home would never have to deal with that because they're not reusing pasta water to make 8 different sauces. But I'm doing that today, and so I thought it'd be important to have a tall pot with lots of room for the water to expand.
A question. So do you add the olive oil or extra virgin olive oil, even if you are doing just cacio e pepe?
So there are different versions of all of these dishes. I add olive oil and butter to my cacio e pepe. People out there in Italy and around the rest of the world may say that's a no-no and you're not supposed to do that. I like that little extra like tang and spiciness from the oil, and I like that creaminess from the butter. So I would say yes, for my versions of all of these dishes, this is how I do them. And that's not to say there's not another way out there that they can be done, or a better way, or an alternative way, but as I was saying before, I did a lot of research, I've done a lot of testing, I've devoted my entire life to pasta and cooking and learning and teaching, and so this is what I think is my favorite way to do these dishes. And so yes, I would add the olive oil to just toast the pepper right as it starts to sizzle. You can see here where we are now. We're getting nice crispy bits all over our pork. And what I actually like to do, whether you're using Liguricia, whether you're using guanciale, is to scoop out all of these porky bits once they're nice and crispy around the edges. The reason why I like to do this is because then we can preserve that texture by adding it back in later. We're gonna put our pasta in here. We're gonna put some of that pasta water. We're gonna cook this down. It's gonna become emulsified. It's gonna get creamy. That's gonna take a couple of minutes. And if you leave these crispy pork pieces in here while all of that's happening, they're gonna get really limp, they're gonna get soft, they're gonna get soggy. You're gonna lose that textural contrast. And if you know anything about me, the way I like to cook, the way I like to eat, is I'm very big on texture. So by adding these back in right towards the end, we're going to really preserve that texture for our finished dish and elevate it even further. Let's check on our pasta. Allow me to burn my fingers. We'll give it a little taste test. If you're not into taste testing, dried pasta, a good way to check is just to rip it in half. And you can kind of see right in the center. If there's a white dot or a white line in the center of your cooked pasta, it needs a little longer to cook. If it's all one color, this has a tiny bit of a chew. I actually really like where it's at. One step before you hit al dente, I would say about 80% cooked. I'm actually gonna bring it out and land it here into my oil and my black peppers. Bring some of that starchy pasta water with you. And that's why sometimes using a less amount of water is actually much more favorable. You can't see in the steam over here. There we go. That's why using almost less water is more favorable, because then you get a starchier product to work with. I've actually seen, I don't want to like freak anyone out, but I've seen methods and techniques where you actually cook dried pasta in cold water, starting from cold, and you bring it up to a boil. Totally crazy way to do it, but it works, and you get very starchy water.
Just a question, Chef, would you recommend doubling up on the cheese to make it extra lush?
Great question. I would actually not double up on the cheese. I would go a little extra butter. The reason being is that if you put so much cheese, there's a chance that it could get really grainy on you. It'll get like almost too thick and almost not enjoyable, especially once it cools a degree or two. And obviously you don't want that. And so extra butter will make it really lush, really creamy without the risk of it like kind of congealing. If you've ever had like cold mac and cheese, is not the best. So that's a good question though.
And then can you repeat for people people, maybe if they just joined in, how much pasta are you adding?
So how much pasta I'm adding? I'm using one of these deli containers here. This is about 8 ounces. It is 2 cups. It is enough for 1 giant bowl of pasta for 1 person, or 2 regular small sized bowls of pasta for 2 people. So it really just depends. And that's a dry pasta. Most of these are interchangeable, whether you're using fresh pasta or dried pasta. Some of them, like the tomato-based sauces that we get into, lend more to being dry pasta because the pasta will cook in the tomato sauce and really suck up a lot of that flavor. Versus the non-tomato based sauces might be better for fresh pasta that's not going to cook in the sauce as long. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep, cool. So, I just turned this down so nothing crazy is happening. I'm grabbing a little bit of my pasta water. Starchy pasta water coming all together with my pasta. And I'm adding, this is a 2 ounce ladle, about 6 ounces of water. And that's because I pulled out my pasta when it was about 80% cooked. So there needs to still be some cooking happening in the pan, which you'll see most of these sauces do require. The Italians call this step straccinare, which means to drag through. And we're actually dragging the noodles through our sauce to create what is one known as pasta. So swirling that together, scraping off all those nice beautiful brown bits, bringing this back up to a boil. And we're slowly going to cook down, tighten up our pasta, make a nice creamy glaze just from the fat of the ham, guanciale, and the olive oil and black pepper. Now a note here on our cheese. I want to go a little close-up action for everyone. We talked about the importance of using, hold on, that didn't switch.
What is this called again?
Hold on one second. Sorry. What is what called again? I'm sorry.
There is a question about what is this called again?
What we're making?
I think that was the question.
This is called Gricia is a pasta from Rome. It is pork product. Usually, there we go, much better. Sorry about that, guys. It is a pork product, usually guanciale. In this case, we're using the country ham, black pepper, cheese. Usually pecorino. I'm using a blend of pecorino and Parmigiano because I like kind of that sharp and tanginess from the pecorino and that nice nuttiness you get from Parm. Important thing for all of these sauces here, if we look at our cheese, I'm not using the pre-ground stuff. I'm not using the chunky, sandy stuff. I'm not using the long shreds. It's going to make a huge difference in your final sauce. What you want is this powdery stuff you get from a microplane, a very fine cheese grater. Something like this with super small teeth. The reason being, if you use long shreds, if you use pre-ground, kind of like the chunky cheese, what's going to end up happening is that it's not going to emulsify, it's not going to melt quickly, and you're going to end up with a grainy pasta where the cheese is not fully incorporated. So obviously nobody wants that. It's important to take that extra step and grate your own cheese on a very fine cheese grater. Important stuff. It's all in the details, especially when you're working with such few ingredients. So we can see here, my water has almost evaporated and sucked up into the pasta. I have probably 2 ounces of this super starchy water here down in the bottom. If you're curious, if your pasta needs to cook a little longer, give it a little taste. If it still needs a little more cook, too much chew for you, you can add another ladle or 2 of the water to the pan. I like where I'm at. I got a little bit of water there on the bottom. I'm going to drop the heat all the way down, and we're going to add half the cheese. And then give it a really nice agitation.
And then Chef, straccinare, again, is to drag. That was the
Straccinare is like a slang term to drag through. Depending on the dialect, it could mean some other things. But I like, in the sense when you're talking about pasta, it means to drag through. And this agitation here is very important to create a really creamy and smooth emulsion. I'm going to bring in my butter. There's lots of residual heat here in the pan, so I'm not worried about losing any heat here. And if you see things are getting too tight on you and tightening up, things aren't as creamy as you like, you could add a little bit of pasta water. But this shouldn't be a very wet sauce. All that cheese coats the noodles. The noodles coat the cheese. You have a really creamy, smooth, cheesy sauce down on the bottom of the pan. It's not wet. It's not soupy. You end up with this beautiful, really rich, luscious sauce. And then because we use so much cheese, we use the pasta water, very often here, you don't end up needing to add any additional salt to the dish because everything is in there. Don't forget that last bit of our salty ham. And adding that right at the last moment.
When did you turn off the heat, Chef?
Right before I added the cheese, I turned off the heat. And the reason I do that is because there's tons of residual heat. Ideally, you don't want to boil cheese. It's going to separate on you if you don't have any acid in your pan to help kind of keep things emulsified. And there's plenty of residual heat from the hot pasta, the pan itself, that you can usually kill the heat. Add your tempered cheese, your tempered butter, not ice cold, right out of the fridge. Room temperature. You pulled it out right when you started making your pasta. You have your mise en place there, and you're ready to go. We'll go here into a bowl. And I have my super creamy, cheesy, and you can see here how it is completely coated all the noodles. It's nice and luscious. There's no graininess to it. It's not clumpy, which is often really important because nobody wants to eat a really clumpy pasta. It becomes almost thicker by the time you finish plating it and it sits in front of you. Oh man, it's so good. All right. Now I like to finish it with a little more pecorino cheese here right on top. And a little more black pepper. And the reason I add the black pepper is because we have that toasted, dry toasted black pepper in there. And then I always think it's really nice to put another layer of that freshly cracked black peppercorns right on top. And you end up with this beautiful bowl of a classic Roman pasta. And that came together in, I mean, if we weren't stopping, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
10 minutes.
About that.
Pretty exciting stuff. So we'll set this aside. Pasta number one, out of the way. Let's get started on the next one. Or should any questions on that, I guess, first?
Yeah.
Questions. Questions
Let's
first.
take some questions on this one specifically.
Questions on that
So essentially,
specifically.
that was cacio e pepe.
Cacio e pepe, if you didn't use the pork product. Cacio e pepe, if you did use the pork product, la grisha. Two different dishes together as one. I use the parm and the pec. You could just use the pecorino. It'll give it a little more sharpness. Or you could use all parm and it'll make it much more mellow and mild.
Any questions?
Questions?
On this one before we move on.
Let's move on. Questions are going to come in as soon as I start this next
Yes,
one. I know
because
it.
there's a little bit of.
I know. There's like that 1 minute lag. All right. We'll give it a second while I pull over my next.
Yes, great. Everyone says, bravo, wow, looks amazing. Oh, great. So glad everyone is enjoying it.
Really glad.
All right, I think we can move on.
All right, we can move on. All right, I got my next ingredients here.
What is the next sauce we're doing, Chef?
Next, we are doing matriciana or amatriciana, depending on how you want to interpret the dialects, and arrabbiata, which means angry. It's an angry pasta sauce. Yes.
Yes, before we move on, at the beginning, when you were toasting the peppercorns, how much pepper did you add to the skillet?
As much or as little as you'd like. I did exactly 33 turns of black pepper. So you could turn your pepper mill and count 33 times, or you could add as much pepper as your palate desires. So totally up to you. It's hard to say a specific teaspoon amount because every brand of peppercorns is going to have a different potency or pungency. If you're using really good peppercorns, you'll probably need less. If you're using really old, not so good peppercorns, you might need a little more to get that peppery flavor.
And one more question. Where did you get those small trays?
Oh, these are called sizzle trays. We use them in the restaurants. They're good for heating up meats, for holding utensils. Daiso has these, and you can find them all over the internet. But I know sizzle trays. You can find them in restaurant supply stores too. They come in different shapes and sizes. I really like these. That's just me.
Do you count every time the pepper?
Every single time. I worked for a chef once who gave me a recipe to redo. It was like a vinaigrette for a carrot dish. And he was kind of like obsessive compulsive in weird ways. And so he wrote the recipe for the one little taster portion he made for us to try. And it was like, eight turns of black pepper for the vinaigrette that he made. But then he was like, all right, we need this for service for tomorrow. We need like a times 40 batch. So it was, 100 something turns of black pepper. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. And sitting there like turning to black pepper, counting for the recipe. And at the end of the day, you're seasoning with black pepper. You're making it taste good. You're doing it to your own taste and how you want the final dish to turn out.
Yes. Now
to the next. Amatriciana, arrabbiata. It starts as an arrabbiata sauce, which is an angry tomato sauce. It's a spicy sauce with lots of red crushed pepper flakes and pork product. So in this case, we're going to be using pancetta instead of guanciale. They say arguably that pancetta may have been used in the original version of this dish, or it may have been guanciale. There's a lot of back and forth. Some people say that it has garlic. Some people say that it has onions. I'm going to use shallots for the sake of being somewhere right in the middle. Excuse me. For the sake of being somewhere right in the middle.
Go ahead.
Okay. I thought you had another question.
Yes.
And so that's kind of where I land on it. But at the end of the day, it is a sauce that plays off of the rich fattiness of pork and the sweet, succulent flavor of tomatoes. The pepper flakes, the black pepper, the onions, the garlic are all kind of like co-stars. They're there to just make the stars look really good. And so thinking about that as you put this together, you could use garlic, you could use onion. I'm using shallot. You can leave them all out. It's really about the pork and about the tomato in this sauce. Good?
One more question before we move on again. Back to the cacio e pepe sauce. Is the cacio e pepe sauce quantities for 8 ounces of noodles?
No, the quantities you see me using are not the quantities that are written on the recipe. I'm using smaller amounts here in front of you, so I don't have a giant bowl of pasta for 2 to 4 people. But I wrote a very specific recipe because I know everybody wanted specifics. They didn't want generalities. And that'll give you a bowl for 2 to 4 people, depending on if you want 8 to 16 ounces of pasta. But it's going to depend on the type of noodle that you're using, how much you want to give people, how much you want to eat. So while serving sizes are very hard to tell, you could probably use about 16 ounces of pasta for the recipes on the website. Make sense? I think so. Cool. All right. Like I said, shallot, I want to take a learning moment here and just go through how to cut a shallot. I know shallot people, they're like tiny, they're kind of like onions, but people are like, oh my God, how do I cut these things? I like to take the top off and take the bottom off. Take off that outside layer, just like an onion. All of that you should be able to peel. No problem. We'll get rid of these. Those go to the side. And then I like to split open my shallot so I have a flat side on all of them. Flat, flat, flat. And then everybody's so used to cutting shallots with the tip of their knife like this. I feel like that's really hard. You can't really see what you're doing. You need to lean over it. Instead, what I actually like to do better is use the heel of my knife and then leaving the part that I'm not cutting, just like when you learn how to cut onions, you leave part of it still attached. You do the same thing, but with the heel of the knife. And then this way you could come in on the back side, and I think you can be a lot more precise and it's a lot easier to cut. Especially when you're trying to cut small dices of things. And you end up with a much nicer cut doing your shallots like that. Give it a try. Let me know what you think. Once I do it like this, it's hard to go back. Now before anybody's like, oh my gosh, what do I do with these other pieces of shallots? You can throw them into your stock. I'm making chicken stock. That's probably where these are gonna go. You put them into your salad dressing, or chop them up and put them into your sauce right here. Totally up to you. So I have my shallots. Whoa, I have my shallots, right? Perfect. We're going to start oil in the pan, medium heat. We'll hit it with our pancetta. Pancetta is one of those things you want to look at here. It is similar to guanciale in the sense that they're both pork, they're both cured, but different fat contents. You got to think about the way you cut them. Pancetta is a much leaner piece of meat with more muscle, meaning you need to cut it smaller than you would guanciale. You could cut guanciale into nice big rectangles, big long strips. You can't really do that with pancetta, or it's going to end up being much chewier, and you're not going to have that same pleasant textural contrast as you do if you were to sub these out even Stevens. If you're trying to decide, do I want to use pancetta, do I want to use guanciale, I don't know. Keep in mind that a really good pancetta is more similar to a really good guanciale than they are different, versus a really good pancetta to a really bad pancetta. So think about the quality of what you can get more so than which one you can get. Always go for the best version of that, and that's the one you want to go for. So we're sizzling up our pancetta here in the olive oil. It's getting nice and loud, so I'm just kind of controlling the heat by lifting it up and down off of the heat, and that'll kind of help me control my temperature. Yes?
Yes, whenever you're ready for me, we do have questions. Does the type of pan matter? You made cocktail in a sauté. This is a saucier. Does it matter? Or rather, please just tell us if it does matter.
So, really good question. The pan choice doesn't necessarily matter. I don't think it matters for any of these sauces. I just don't have an unlimited number of sauté pans, and I have like some sauciers, I have some sautés. Since we're cooking through so many things, I just have whatever's on the stack next to us. The one thing I guess to keep in mind is like you wouldn't want to use a flat, small sauté pan to cook something like these tomato sauces that have like more tomato in them, otherwise it's not going to fit. But as long as your pan is the right size to fit everything and the pasta into it, you're good to go. So it's not necessarily the pan that I'm using, it's just the pan size that I have for the dish.
Chopped guanciale?
So yes, guanciale is cut, sliced, chopped, lardons, similar to like we just did here. This is pancetta, like I was saying, but you could usually use guanciale or fine guanciale in this dish.
Yes. Do you render the fat in a rather hot pan?
Yes, so this is a medium heat, exactly 300 degrees if you're curious. And that allows it to get crispy on the outside, but stay soft and tender in the center. I think that's really important. You're not looking for like crispy bacon bits in any of these dishes. You want that crispiness on the outside, but you want it nice and soft still in the middle. And I think that textural contrast is really important whenever you're working with any of these pork products. If you render them over crazy high heat and you just get this done super fast, what you end up with is like a really dry, crispy piece of pork that has no flavor or fat or texture left in it. And you're kind of like missing out then on the beauty of what that pork product has to offer because you're cooking it so quickly and so high. So being mindful of your temperature, watching the way it looks. You can see here there's still white, there's still fat on all of these pieces of guanciale, all these pieces of pancetta, but fat is also rendering off of them. So we got the best of both worlds.
We do have a question about the pasta. You said 16 ounces for the recipes on the website. That's about 450 grams of pasta. That's a lot of pasta.
It's about a pound of pasta. A pound usually serves 2 to 4 people, depending on how much you want to eat. If you're like, oh my gosh, that's way too much pasta for me, then don't use 16 ounces. Make 8. Nothing's going to happen to you other than, you might end up with a little extra sauce, and then you can cook the pasta again next time and use the sauce over. So I wouldn't stress about the exact amount of pasta that you're using for all these dishes, and more focus on the technique of how to make the sauces. That's what this is about. We're not focusing on the pasta today, we're focusing on the sauce.
Great. And then, is there a benefit to the fancy drizzler on top of your olive oil? Why do you use that rather than just a normal olive oil bottle?
I like this. It looks pretty on my counter. I buy olive oil in like the big containers, like from the olive oil ranches. And like having one of those big jugs of olive oil is really hard to deal with and pour things out of. And then this I can keep on my counter. It looks nice. The spout helps control the flow of the oil coming out of it. And then I can just refill that with my big jug of oil rather than keeping a giant jug of oil on the counter. So that's just my own personal preference. If you just buy little bottles of olive oil, you could keep those. There's nothing wrong with that. So let's take a look real quick. Moving on, next step. We're nice and crispy here on our pancetta. Now we're going to come in with our onions. If you were going to use garlic, you'd come in with your garlic here as well. Some people say the recipe itself shouldn't have either. I like the flavor of shallots. It's kind of like the best of both worlds. You'll find, if you're looking at different versions of this dish or different recipes, that if it has onions or garlic, you need to cook it longer. In terms of like, they'll say you need to cook it 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. And I think that's really to just kind of cook out that onion and garlic flavor and make sure it doesn't overpower things. Because the beauty of matriciana or arrabbiata is that balance of the pork and the tomato, not the onions and the garlic. So I think shallot's a great way. You cut them small, you get that oniony and garlicky flavor in here without overdoing it. Then we have our pepper flakes. We're using crushed red pepper flakes. This is another thing. I can't tell you the exact amount of this to use. There's so many different brands of crushed red pepper flakes out there, including the really not so good ones that come in the paper packets you get from your pizza delivery guy. Those you could probably eat a lot of. If you have really good ones, you can't. They're spicy. So add as much or as little as you want to this. They're going to bloom, and then we're going to stop the cooking process with our white wine. White wine you will find in a matriciana sauce just about everywhere. That is not as controversial of an ingredient. Red pepper flakes you'll find in matriciana sauce and arrabbiata sauce. What I like to do is add a little bit of black pepper too. I think that kind of gives spiciness and depth of flavor, while also kind of like playing off of those peppery notes that you find in the pork. So I do a combination of the pepper flakes, the black pepper, the shallots. Let these bloom in here. If you're going just arrabbiata, you would go garlic and the pepper flakes, and you wouldn't probably use any wine. So you kind of see where the recipes diverge looking at the ingredient list. But we're going with matriciana here. I'm going to stop the cooking process by deglazing with my wine. A great little tidbit and trick I always like to tell people is, recipes call for wine, whether you're roasting beef or making pasta, and it's like cook off the alcohol. What does that mean exactly? You see all these vapors coming off out of the pan. If you waft them towards your face, don't stick your face over the pan, that's dangerous. Waft them towards your face and try to take a breath in. They're alcohol vapors. It might actually make you cough a little bit. It'll be hard to breathe. That's because humans breathe oxygen, they don't breathe alcohol. And so when you're able to easily waft and smell the vapors that are coming off of the pan, you know with confidence that there's no more alcohol left in there. There's just the liquid and flavor of the wine. So while that's cooking down, I'm going to drop my pasta. I'm using penne here. In this case, dried penne. Nice bronze dye extruded into my water. I'm going to watch my timer. And then once all of your alcohol is cooked off here in the pan, we have this nice creamy, luscious, garlicky, porky sauce. We're going to add our tomatoes. I like to crush these tomatoes by hand. It gives them a little more texture, gives them a little more tomatoiness to them. But if you just have like tomato sauce in the can or whatever it is, that is totally acceptable as well. all of that tomato. And then I'm going to add a little bit of salt just because the tomatoes are not seasoned. I'm going to be adding some pasta water to this as well, which has salt in it. So don't go too crazy with the salt right now.
Chef Joe, what is your preferred brand of olive oil? Do you use different brands for cooking and finishing?
Yeah, good question. I use different brands for different things. I'll use a lot of California olive oil. Actually, this is a California olive oil that I'm using, that I use like in bulk, that I'll keep for like this. It's very mild. This is Corto, which is really nice. I like the way they store and package and ship things. It's in like light safe. It's in a cardboard box with a special kind of liner they put into it that it's not going to break. It's not glass, but it also is protected from the sun. It's protected from oxygen. It's protected from heat, which are all things that'll ruin olive oil. I have other like nice fancy imported olive oils from Italy that I'll use for like finishing a dish or finishing fish or finishing like a steak. I focus more on the olive variety more so than the brand of olive oil. Like if I know I want a very spicy olive, I'll like choose something like Castelvetrano. If I want something a little more mild, I'll maybe go for a blend of olives that'll kind of like give you something more balanced. And I think by thinking of it that you're actually like juicing a fruit, and if you want something really sweet, you use pineapple juice. If you want something more acidic, you use grapefruit juice. You think of olives the same way, and so kind of picking and choosing the variety of olive depending on what you're looking for in your oil is how you choose.
A couple questions. What brands of pots and pans do you use?
I use a mix of All-Clad,
Hexclad,
All-Clad, Proclamation,
Maiden as well?
I have like one or two Maidens. Volrath. I have quite a few Volrath. That's kind of like the restaurant version. That's not as expensive as All-Clad, but still pretty sturdy. I don't have any Mauviel, but that's another really good one. I don't have any Great Jones, but I know they do a lot of promoting on social media. I just really like these sauciers. I think they're really great for bringing pasta and sauce together as one. So our tomatoes in there, simmering, bringing everything together. I'm going to come in with a little tasty taste.
Yes, you didn't remove any of the rendered fat, right? Everything
Nope,
stays in
all the
sauce?
fat, everything stays in the sauce. Fat is flavor. And the reason why I left all that pork in there is because it's a different variety of pork. I know the other one, like the cacio e pepe, we took the pork out because I wanted to preserve that texture. It's such a simple dish with not a lot of nuance, but I want to infuse the tomatoes with the flavors of that pork and stew the two together for about 5 minutes while my pasta's cooking. It's a very quick sauce, comes together quickly, but it's really about using really good pork and really good tomatoes. And then you'll like those two things together is like almost like magic connection. And it's just like sweet, sour, savory, spicy, peppery, so good. Yes.
Would you add sugar to the tomato sauce? I don't know why my mom does that.
The reason why your mom does that is because the variety of tomatoes that she uses, the can of tomatoes probably, is very acidic. Probably not a sweet variety of tomatoes. If like I use Bianco di Napoles almost exclusively, which are grown here in California. I think they're San Marzanos, but they're grown here in California, and they're just like incredible tomatoes. I normally don't have to add any sugar, any salt, or I add salt. I don't have to add sugar, anything like that. If you're against adding sugar, but you want to reduce the acidity, you can just add baking soda, which is kind of a weird thing, but baking soda is an alkaline, and it will make things less acidic, but not sweeter. So you're kind of like doing that thing where it's not as sweet or not as acidic, but without adding sugar. Yes?
It looks like my tomato sauce is separating from my olive oil. Just I put too much oil in it?
No, not at all. You're that's fine. It means you're at a very low temperature. The fat is separating. That's fine. Fat is flavor. If you ever make like a stewed gravy or sauce or something like an Italian tomato braise that you cook for a very long time, the fat separates. It's infusing its flavor into the sauce. When we toss in our pasta, our starchy water, it's going to bring everything together. It's going to re-emulsify and become together as one. So don't worry about that. You're on the right track.
Another question. Sorry, I'm way behind on the video, but I bought uncured pancetta, Borside. It's pre-sliced. Can I just cube it small?
Yes, not a problem. Cube it small. Don't leave it long or thick because pancetta is a tougher cut of meat. That is not going to render the same as guanciale if you left it in long, big strips.
Would sodium bicarbonate work too instead of sugar to reduce the pH?
That's exactly what I just said. I think they're just behind on the check.
Yes, I just want to make sure.
Yeah. That is what baking soda is. Giving everybody a stir back here. We're still cooking. That's going. I'm actually going to pull a little bit of this out now that it is done. Just because I have more sauce here than I do pasta I cooked. And I want the two to be a nice ratio together. And now we have a second for questions. Now's a good time for questions.
Should we cut the bacon in preparation for the next recipe?
Yes. Yes, go ahead. Get ahead. Have everything ready to go. If you plan on making pesto, you could pick your herbs right now. If you plan on eating cheese, you could have it grated in advance. If you're going to use the bacon, you could have it cut into little strips, little pieces. I wouldn't dice it. I would leave it in strip form. Yeah, plan ahead. Now's a good time to plan ahead. This is coming together. I'm going to grab my pasta now. We're going to go right here into our tomato sauce. And this is one of those sauces. Bringing all the starchy water with me. And because it is a tomato-based sauce, and there's quite a bit in here, let me get everything so I can talk to you.
These sauces are all really fast. Do any of them get better the longer they cook?
1 second. I'm losing water back there. Let me just refill. So someone asked about they get better the longer they cook. For the most part, no. Actually, it's kind of like the contrary, the opposite of that. They don't get better the longer they cook. The reason being is you want that bright, fresh, robust flavor of the pork and the tomato. As tomato cooks, the flavor obviously changes. Becomes deeper, richer, sometimes sweeter, and you almost lose a lot of that freshness and balance that you find in a quick pan sauce like this. That's not to say you can't make a stewed tomato sauce. It's just a different sauce entirely. I wouldn't cook any of these sauces for a longer period of time.
Great. And then for the arrabbiata, do you cook in the parsley or is that just for serving on top?
Yeah, so the parsley we're going to add last minute with the cheese. I'm actually going to put the parsley in here, so I'm kind of like fusing the arrabbiata and the amatriciana. So I have my chopped parsley, I have my grated pecorino, and just like with the other ones, whenever we're adding herbs, whenever we're adding cheese, we're going to do it off the heat right at the last second to bring it all together. And I actually still have a fusilli. Came along for the ride from the pot. That's what I get for reusing pasta water. And we're just going to boil and cook, bringing the two together here as one. The noodles sucking up all that rich tomato sauce. And this agitation that I'm doing, the swirling and the turning, is not like just for show. It's not something we only do at the restaurant. What it actually does is it helps the pasta release its starches. It creates an emulsion, just like if you've ever made aioli or salad dressing. In order to hold a stable emulsion, you need agitation. You need something to help mix everything together and suspend all of the fat in the water. And so by mixing it and stirring it and tossing it is actually part of that process to cream out the sauce, to bring this all together and make it become one. So now we're here, we are off the heat. We're gonna go parsley, we're gonna go cheese, and then I like using a spatula. You could use a spoon, but the spatula really helps me get down in here, and we can really give it a super nice toss, emulsifying, agitating, making sure it's melty and creamy. If one guy jumps away, that's okay. And then we'll go right into our bowl. And then I always like to finish this too with a little bit more of that pecorino on top. I think the pecorino plays really nicely with the pork here. If you're doing the arrabbiata, I think the parm actually works a little better with extra chili, because the pecorino could sometimes be considered spicy in a way because of that saltiness and kind of like bite that it can have. Cheese on top, always freshly grated. And voila, good stuff. So here we have matriciana. I prefer matriciana. It comes from Amatrice, which is north of Rome. In their dialect, they would call it matriciana. La matriciana, not alla amatriciana. If you're in Rome, where a lot of people say the dish came from, not Amatrice, then they would say alla amatriciana, which is one of those very confusing dialectual differences that you will find in Italy, but it's how people hold on to their identity. It's how people are incredibly passionate about food and cooking in a country like Italy. So, questions on that as we get on to our next? Anything?
I think we'll wait for just a minute or two.
We'll give it a minute.
Yes.
Just in case.
Yes.
I'm going to rinse my spatulas off and get ready for the next round. Next, we're doing carbonara, one of my favorites.
Adding parsley applies to the matriciana.
You know what? I add parsley to the matriciana if I have it. You probably wouldn't find it in a classic recipe, but I think it adds kind of a nice bit of greenery, a nice bit of herbaceous and freshness to the dish. I prefer it, but it depends, I guess, if you have it, how classical you want to be when it comes to it, but I would add it. That's just me. I don't want to throw anyone off and get too crazy here, but I would do it. All right. Next, we're going carbonara.
If I'm making another pasta, should I put new water in?
No. So as you can see, I am using the same water over and over. I added new water just because it evaporated. A lid will help prevent that if I remember to put my lid on. Duh. And then we'll go with our carbonara coming up next, right?
Yes. Carbonara. And then is adding parsley to carbonara considered illegal? LOL.
That's kind of like another one of all of these dishes are kind of like the four founding pasta dishes that you could find that say like a Roman classics, amatriciana, La Gricia, cacio e pepe, carbonara, and that's going to bother me. Let's not do that. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. And I think that, depending on who you're asking, sometimes it makes a difference, sometimes it doesn't. My versions are how I do them. I don't add parsley in my carbonara. I would never put parsley in carbonara. I never put peas in carbonara. I think bacon's acceptable because that smokiness kind of plays really nicely with the eggs if you're not going to use guanciale. I am going to use guanciale in this case for this one so everyone can see. Actually, I wanted to pull out a piece of guanciale so everyone is like, oh my gosh, that's what guanciale looks like. So we'll come up here real quick. Guanciale, this is a small piece. It comes from the cheek of the pig. It's cured. This one, what is important if you're working with and dealing with guanciale is sometimes it comes with the skin still on it. The skin's tough, it's rubbery, it's hard, it's often darker in color than just the fat. If you look here and you just see fat, meat, fat, you're good. If you see fat, meat, fat, and something else on top, like another thin layer of something, you do want to cut that off. And you usually do that by peeling it off like so, and then that you can put into stock. You can discard it. You can do whatever you want with it, but you don't want to eat it. It doesn't cook up the same. It actually makes things very chewy, which is not good. So cutting up our guanciale here, I always err on the side of a little bit thicker because it renders out a bit, and that kind of gives you a little more wiggle room for your cooking. And then that way you're able to get it crispy on the outside, but keeping it nice and soft and tender, almost like medium rare, if there ever was such a thing when you're cooking guanciale. But I really like these kind of thick lardone style pieces. If you have bacon, you'd cut it in a very similar fashion to how I'm doing here.
We do have a question about the previous sauces. Would you top any with fresh basil of either of the previous dishes? Would it be a crime?
I wouldn't. It would not be a crime. The Italian police are not going to come bother anyone, depending on what you do here today or in the future. I don't think it'd be a crime. I wouldn't do it. That's just me. But, you know, it's like, put basil on it and don't call it amatriciana. It's still going to be delicious. You have basil, you don't want it to go bad. Why are you not going to add it to something? So I think it's important to kind of like cook with your gut. You know, if you really like basil, get it in there. What are you waiting for? Like, don't wait for me to tell you to do it. Just do it. You know, it's going to be okay. So we'll start here, medium heat again, a little bit of olive oil. The guanciale, because I'm using actual guanciale for this one, has a lot of fat. So I don't need a lot of fat in my pan in order to render this out. Same thing, medium heat, not too high, not too low. Carbonara is a great dish that shows control over temperature management. It's one of those dishes that, like, if things are too cold, it's not going to work. If things are too hot, it's not going to work. It has raw egg in it. The egg needs to be tempered at room temperature, so the heat of the pasta from your pan is able to cook the egg and create an emulsion. It needs to be cheese that is tempered, so that way your cheese is room temperature. It's not cold, it's not warm, and that helps coat and melt more quickly and evenly. It's really about understanding the temperature of everything that you're working with. Now, there are carbonara recipes out there that use cream, that use dairy. Mine uses cheese and it uses egg yolks. Egg yolks, some people use whole eggs, but if you're using a whole egg, then you're getting egg whites. What is an egg white? But mostly water. And if you wonder why your carbonara might be a little thin and watery, it's probably because you're not just using yolks. So I'm using some really nice egg yolks here, super orange, which is really important. That'll give you that bright yellow color that everybody wants in their carbonara. And then I have a bowl, heat-proof bowl on the side. This is important. Carbonara happens in two phases. You cook it partially in the pan and you finish it in a bowl. The reason being is you don't want things to overcook in the pan. You're working with egg. So you're never going to actually put the egg directly onto the heat, or you're going to end up with something that is curdled, more like a savory scrambled eggs, which is not the worst thing. My dad used to make this pasta dish like when he was cooking for me and my brothers, where it was like, I don't even remember, it's like egg and tomato tossed together, but it would like cook the egg with the pasta, so you'd have like almost like strands of like scrambled egg tossed in with the spaghetti or the rigatoni or whatever he was using. I didn't really like it. It's just me personally, but he really liked cooking for us. It made him feel special, so it was always, that was the special thing. It was when Dad was cooking for me and my brothers. Kind of gave us a different experience. That was not a dish my mom made. And it's not a dish that I make, but it's a dish, you know, and that just goes to show that, you know, you can make pasta with scrambled eggs in it. It's just not going to be the same thing as carbonara. The history of carbonara, highly debated. Let's take a moment and talk about it here. Nobody necessarily maybe knows exactly where it comes from. Some people say it comes from Rome. It's not a very old dish. The earliest recipes of it, I think, are like 1950s, which is not that long ago. Some people say it was like a post-World War II dish, using the rations that the GIs had, like powdered eggs and freeze-dried bacon, things like that, using dried pasta. And like right after the war, there weren't a lot of ingredients. And so this was like a result of that. Some people say that's completely inaccurate and not true. And other people say it gets the name carbonari, which were like coal miners back in the day, would make a dish like this, and they would cook it over charcoal just by putting the pans directly on charcoal, and there'd be all these black specks that would kind of like come up and float in the air and land down in the pasta dish, in which case you'd end up with kind of like this black speckled pasta. People would name it carbonara because it was by the carbonari and it had coal in it, and that's kind of like a story over where it came from. Another version of it is that some people say the first version had squid ink in it, and so it was like a black saucy pasta dish, and that reminded people that it's black as coal, and so they gave it the name carbonara. That's another iteration of it. At the end of the day, we don't really know for sure, so pick your favorite story, and that's the one you can tell all of your friends and be like, hey, I know where carbonara comes from. Or you can just be like, hey, I know all of these stories, possibly where carbonara comes from. I think the more stories, the more impressive. So, we're getting nice and crispy all around the edges here. Golden brown, still soft in the center. I think it's important that you don't overcook guanciale or rush guanciale. We're not looking for bacon bits. I'll say it a million times. We're not going for super crispy, no fat left in it. You want it to have some chew. You want it to have some fat, and that's part of the like beauty of this dish is the texture of the carbonara, or the texture of the guanciale in the carbonara. Brings it all together as one. So we're getting very close on that. While that's finishing, we have our bowl here on the side. I'm gonna get my egg yolks in the bowl. Everybody in the bowl. That one didn't want to come with me. I have a spatula, and then I have all of my cheese. I'm using a blend of cheeses here. You could use all of one or the other, Parmigiano and Pecorino. Same thing with the cacio e pepe. I like a blend of the two. I think you kind of get the best of both worlds. We're gonna do cheese and egg all on the side. Okay? We're going to create a cheesy, eggy paste here. And it's important, things are not cold. Everything is room temperature. And this is our base for our carbonara sauce here. So that'll be sitting on the side. Our guanciale is rendering. I'm going to come in now that I'm crisped up and happy where it's at. Add a little bit of black pepper here. I think the black pepper is an important addition. Guanciale has that black pepper, but I think a little more. Toasting up in the oil really adds kind of like a nice perfuminess and spiciness to the finished dish. And then for this, I'm using fresh pasta. This is beet chitarra or tonarelli. I had some extra beet dough, rolled it out on my chitarra, so I have these nice thick square noodles. What is important to kind of think about is how long the noodles need to cook into the sauce to come together as one. So I purposely didn't use the beet with the matriciana because I wanted the dried pasta to cook in the tomato sauce and suck up all of that sauce. Because there's raw egg here that's not going to be added back to the pan and it's not going to cook over the heat for very long, I think a pasta that doesn't need to be cooked in a pan for very long is a good kind of route to go here with this one. That's not to say you can't make carbonara with rigatoni. You could totally do that, but I'm just explaining my train of thought. So I'm going to drop here noodles into the water. Those are only going to take a minute or so.
Because it's fresh pasta.
Because it's fresh pasta, right? So once you see your carbonara or your guanciale nice and rendered, you smell the black pepper. I'm going to grab a ladle of my pasta water. That's going to sizzle and it's going to stop the cooking process and ensure that things don't get burnt or too crispy. We'll just keep that on low heat here. We're going to give my noodles a stir back there.
If you are cooking along with the carbonara, ooh, it smells so good.
It's the guanciale, and it's like, you think of guanciale and pancetta, they're similar. Guanciale is like funkier, I think, of like a pork product. It has a very distinct smell, but like funky in a good way. Like it's like unctuous and rich. It's like peppery and savory. It almost like fills the air with like umami. And like pancetta is much more like a very clean pork product. It's like very upfront, very refined. It's light and nuanced, where like guanciale is kind of like the bad boy of the pork world.
Can you show a close-up of the egg and cheese mixture?
Yes, egg and cheese mixture.
Close-up version.
close-up version right here. It is a thick
Zoomed in version?
paste.
Yeah.
Cool, like this, thick. And this is just on the side, room temperature, and you'll see how this all comes together. We're not there yet though. Noodles probably have 1 more minute back there. Oh yeah, we're good. I'm gonna grab my noodles out of the water, go right into my pan here. Try to get everyone. I think that's it. So noodles cooked in the pan, back over the heat. I'm gonna grab a little more of the pasta water to come with them, because just like all the other dishes, we do want to emulsify the sauce together, the fat, the noodles, all of that rendered fattiness. Bring this back up to a boil, and I'm gonna leave here on the close-up so you guys can see what's happening in the pan. And then once this comes up to a boil, the sauce is going to tighten, it's going to thicken, it's going to become emulsified.
There's a question about, are those wheat? Is that why they are dark?
They're beet. Beet, not wheat. I said that hard to hear. It's beet, freeze-dried beet powder, which kind of gives it this reddish color. And that's just, the only reason I have that is because it was like fresh pasta dough I had and I wanted beef carbonara. Don't get mad at me. You can use regular pasta dough. I just wanted to utilize what I had. So same thing, we're agitating in the pan here, tossing everything around. And then you can see as things get nice and tight and it's not saucy or soupy and it sucks up most, if not all of that residual pasta water, and you have a nice creamy emulsion in your pot. What you're going to do then is take this mix and add it straight to your egg mix. And then very quickly, you're going to toss the two together, and all of that residual heat from the pasta is going to melt the cheese. It's going to cook the eggs. It's going to emulsify and become rich and creamy. And if you find that this is a little too thin and you're like, oh no, there's a little too much water in there, you know what you do? You add a little bit more cheese and it's going to tighten things up. If maybe it's a little too thick and things are getting a little crazy in there and it's a little hard to mix around, what you end up doing is then add a splash of pasta water. And then you're able to kind of balance it out and bring it together. And what you almost never want to do though is add this back to your pan, because then you're going to end up with scrambled eggs. And we're not making scrambled eggs today. That's no good. So we're going to come in here. I'm going to grab my noodles. Nice noodle pull. They're sucking up all of that wonderful carbonara sauce that we just made. And then coming in with a spoon, I could grab all those bits of guanciale and drizzle my nice thick sauce right over the top. You know you nailed it right, because guanciale is a little salty, the cheese is salty. You shouldn't have to add salt to this dish. I never almost add salt when I'm making carbonara, because all of that saltiness and all of those other flavors really kind of come through together in the best way.
When you moved the pasta to the pork pan again, was the heat back on?
Heat was back on, brought it back to a boil, emulsified everything to reduce the pasta water, brought the two together as one, and you have this beautiful, luscious bowl of carbonara goodness. One of my favorite dishes. It's like this on its own, happy food. That's comfort food right there. Questions as we're moving on. We're gonna get situated real quick. Let the questions flow in naturally. Clear out some of my pans here. And next, we are going pesto. This one should be quick and easy. I'm going to give it another minute for questions.
Would you be against adding a little white wine to the Evo/pork cooking down?
So like I said, I wouldn't be against anything. I wouldn't do it myself. One, because then you've got that white wine flavor, and I don't think the white wine flavor belongs in a dish like this. You could do it. You'll end up with a completely different flavor profile, but there's nothing wrong with doing that. And that's kind of like what cooking is all about, is by making something your own, by carving your own path in the kitchen. And if you want to add white wine to it, I'm not going to stop you. If you want to add a little cream to that, make it extra rich and creamy and luscious, that's totally on you. And you know, at the end of the day, this is your kitchen. You guys are the chefs. So I would not, but you totally can. And that's okay. And that's part of the fun of cooking. It's like when you feel like you could take those creative liberties, like then I feel like I did my job, because then it's like you feel comfortable enough to do something out of the norm. And at the end of the day, that's where I want everybody to be. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I think that's the purpose of this class as well, is to kind of give everyone a baseline of how you do it, and then let everyone kind of use their creative freedom.
To take their own way.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This class is a little different.
Yeah, we're different here today. So next, we're doing pesto here. Pesto is an interesting one in the sense that this is not traditional by any means. It's not at all classical. This is how I make pesto in the form of a condiment. So this is much more about the technique, less so about the ingredients. What I mean by that is you can use any combination of herbs and greens. You can use any combination of cheeses, nuts, or seeds. And it's really just about this technique that we're going to use to bring it all together to coat the pasta. That's going to allow us to be able to interchange this out however we want. So if you look at the recipe online, there's arugula, there's mint, there's parsley. You can put kale in there, fennel fronds, basil. You can go all basil and make this super classic, or completely change it up. Like I had dill in my fridge. I know that's not on the recipe, but I had dill and I wanted to use it. I didn't want it to go bad. This is a great outlet for that. I had some kale. I didn't have arugula, so I'm using kale in here. For my seeds, I'm using pumpkin seeds and cashews. I just wanted to show that like you have that recipe, but you could totally sub out all of these different components and change it entirely, and it's still going to be a delicious pesto product, all about the technique here. So we got boiling water here, brought it to a boil. I like to blanch my greens. That kind of breaks all the chlorophyll cells open, allows them to get greener, and then we could shock them, place them in an ice bath or under cold running water till they are cool, and then we'll blend everything together. It's as easy as it sounds. It's not a very long or complicated process. I add a tiny bit of salt to my water here. The greens are not in the water long enough to really absorb much salt. So you could really heavily season it, or you could just under season it. I think a little salt is better than no salt, but sometimes if you go too much, then you worry that, you know, some of that salty water comes into your blender, things get too salty. So I err on the side of less salt is better in this case. Boiling water, all of our picked greens, no stems here, please. Just the greens. We're going to go right down into the water, and it's really only going to take about 30 seconds, maybe 60. Everybody into the pot. I'm using some tongs here just to mix it all up. Then to catch my pesto as it comes out on the other side, I have a slotted strainer. I'm going to pour the hot water right into this. It's going to catch all of the greens. I'm going to run it under cold water. If you have an ice machine and a big bowl and you want to stick this in ice water to stop it cooking, that works as well. But I've seen this done in restaurants that don't have ice machines. That's That's a thing. And so you can do it with cold water. It stops the cooking process. You just want to stop it from cooking as quickly as possible to preserve this nice bright green color. This is about the technique, not about what's in it. But what's really great about this is could be vegan if you leave out the cheese. Cashews make it really, really rich and creamy. You probably wouldn't even miss the cheese at all. Put a little nutritional yeast or miso in there, kind of help balance out some of that missing cheesy notes. And then it helps you kind of like clear out your fridge. If you're like, have some extra greens left over, you don't know what to do with, beet tops, Swiss chard, whatever it is, this is the way to get rid of them. So 60 seconds, out of the boiling water. I'm gonna pour it right into my strainer to catch it. Careful, things are hot. Hot things are hot. And then we're gonna go cold water, just for like another 60 seconds, moving everything around, just to cool it all off. We're halfway there. Pesto's one of the, I'm like behind my screen thing. Pesto's one of those ones that's like, I really enjoy this technique. I love teaching it to people. I love new cooks when they come into a kitchen. I'm like, have you made pesto before? And they're like, with a mortar and pestle? It's like, you could make it with a mortar and pestle. But I think you end up bruising the greens and you don't preserve that green color as well as when you use a mortar and pestle. But it's like, if you look at the history of pesto, oh boy. Somewhere like Genovese or Liguria, like where basil and pesto originally comes from, it's wild the steps they go through to grow their basil. You know, they treat it like grapes in wine country. You know, basil is actually certified DOP, coming from specific regions. The amount of time it spends on the vine, the size of the leaves they grow to, the time of the day that they pick it from, all of those things are like highly sought after and controlled in that area to get the best prized basil in the world. That makes some of the best pesto. They say that, like, you know, if you read Ligurian cookbooks, they're like, oh, you know, babies' first thing they have after milk is pesto. It's like, I don't know if that's true. This probably might actually be dangerous. But that's how much they love pesto. They put it in writing. I'm going to grab a blender.
And then if you want to explain a little bit about what DOP is, it's very much so like having the Champagne region in France.
Yeah, DOP, can you pronounce the word for me? Because I'm embarrassed. I'm very bad at saying it.
Denominazione Origine di Protetta. I think.
Protection. I think it's Protezionale. Or is it Protetta?
Protetta.
Protetta. Okay. What she said, which is a certified, there's a body, a group that certifies things. They come from a specific place. They're grown and made in a specific way. So like Parmesan cheese is, Parmigiano Reggiano is DOP. There's a lot of other Italian cheeses that's DOP. Basil can be DOP. Tomatoes can be DOP. Champagne is DOP, meaning, you know, champagne not coming from the Champagne region of France is just sparkling wine. So all of these other ingredients and food products can be thought and treated the same way. It's not just limited to champagne. When I first learned that, I was like, whoa, no way. That's so cool. I didn't know that. So we got our blender here going on. I'm going to go into the blender here now with my greens. I have just very gently pushed out the water. You don't need to like go crazy and get every last drop of water out. A little bit of water is going to help this spin and come together. So greens down at the bottom. My cheese, nuts, honey, zest, black pepper, all of the goodies. Everything else I need all here. We're going to go right on top. Make sure we get all of it. Beautiful. Olive oil coming in next. I usually add about half the amount of oil that I think I'm going to need, and then I could always add more, but you can't really take it away. And I don't like my pestos to be too oily. I like them on the thicker side. So, minimal amount of oil there. And sometimes you need a splash of water. Sometimes you don't. Things are going to get loud. Headphone warning. So about 30 seconds. 30 seconds, food processor or blender. You end up with this bright green, luscious, beautiful, one of my favorite condiments, pesto. And you can blend this as thin or as thick as you like it. That's kind of one of the beautiful parts about doing it in a blender, is that you can really control how thick it is, how much oil you want to add, if it's really chunky, or if it's completely emulsified and creamy. And then with the pesto, I do want to show how to bring this together, because it's a little different than some of the other pasta dishes. Pesto is one of those things, because the chlorophyll is in there, the green, you'll lose that green if you're not careful. And so what I mean by that is, like, if you cook this over high heat, it's going to turn brown. You're going to lose the green. And obviously we don't want that. So we need to treat it a little differently. Pesto is probably not the best condiment if you're looking to like use the dried pasta. You want to cook that dried pasta probably all the way through then. But a fresh pasta works really well for pesto. In this case, I have some pappardelle, which I made yesterday. Wow,
Yeah,
that was last
yesterday,
night.
Chef.
That was last night. Crazy. So I have this pappardelle. I'm going to go right down into the water. That's only going to take about a minute or so to cook because it's fresh. And then I'm going to go this way. I'm going to have my pan here that I'm going to catch my pasta in. I'm going to not put anything in it yet. I have my pesto here on the side. I'm going to bring my pasta into the pan, a little bit of that water, get the pan hot and agitated, then add my pesto right at the last second, toss it all together just till it sucks up and coats the pasta, and then it's done. So just almost like the eggs, you want to think of pesto as like you can't really cook it. So you want your sauce to be just about as tight or as thick or as creamy and as hot as you want it before you add your pesto to it. Because once you add your pesto, it's done. Like, you're not cooking it for much longer. So same exact process and theory in that and what you're working with here. And of course, sometimes I go light on the salt here so I could add salt later. If you want to use this as like a salad dressing or like a toast spread, obviously season it all the way through. Don't forget to add your salt and taste it. Questions on pesto so far?
No questions.
This is the one with no
so far.
questions.
Yes.
Either I'm really good at teaching pesto or nobody's cooking along with pesto. They want to make everything else. So pappardelle, I'm going to grab this out of the water here.
Which setting for the blender? Smoothie, frozen dessert, ice, soup?
I mean,
My blender is weird.
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't know what all those different settings are, unfortunately, on your blender. Whichever one is the highest speed is the one I would use. So maybe soup, maybe smoothie, maybe frozen dessert. Just gonna have to play with it. You might like do that thing where you're like and just hit all of them and see what happens. Like, I mean, I don't think you're gonna mess it up by choosing the wrong one. You may need to do it twice if it's not as thin as you want it or it's too chunky, but it's gonna be okay. Don't stress out about which setting on the blender to use.
High speed, yeah.
High speed.
Yes.
High speed. That's what we want. So, pasta in the pan, high heat, a little bit of that starchy water here. We're going to bring this together. We're going to come for the close-up so we can watch this all happening. As soon as I see that the water is bubbling and the pasta is starting to emulsify and get nice and creamy, I'm going to come in with my pesto. Toss, toss, toss. Pesto couple of spoonfuls here. You go as much or as little as you want. Depends how crazy you want to get.
So the pesto sauce, in the end, is just pasta water with some of our pesto added?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all it is. A lot of these sauces are really simple. It's more about the ingredients you're using and the technique you're using to bring them all together.
But a lot can come together very quickly.
So you can do a lot in the amount of time you have and depending on what you have with you. But yeah, that's all the pesto is really bringing together your blended sauce, and you can make that like a day or two in advance.
Did you add any olive oil to the pan?
To the pan, no olive oil in the pan. There's plenty of olive oil in my pesto. So like I said, everything is in that little cup, and then it's just pasta water and pasta till it just starts to thicken up. Even with my pesto, toss it over the high heat. That's gonna melt the cheese. But now I'm turning off the heat. You can see it's nice and thick. It's coating all of my noodles. I'm going to come in my bowl. Pappardelle is one of those ones that's a little weirder to plate because they're really long, thick noodles. You kind of need to do each one almost individually. Otherwise they get kind of crazy on you. Gorgeous. Oh man, this is the one I want to eat. This looks so good. Then I always like to come in, scrape all of these yummy bits. That's all that goodness out of the pan. And then, if you wanted a little bit more cheese on top, totally optional. If you saved some basil or herbs, some nice greens, make a beautiful garnish to this.
Yes, definitely.
Greenery for the scenery. You always eat with your eyes first. So anytime you can save little baby tender greens and put them on top, it's always a nice touch and addition. But I mean, this is pretty magical and spectacular here on your own. And you know, now that you know how to make pesto, you could do this anytime and use any variety of greens. Check it out.
Wow, when we were in Liguria, we had Trophier pasta. I can only find that dried. Is Trophier something you can make fresh?
You can make Trophier fresh. Trophier is very regionally specific to Liguria. So I'm talking to you. Questions on that while we're doing this? It is very regionally specific. It's very, very labor intensive. So finding anyone that sells fresh Trophier is almost impossible because it's a very painstaking process. It is a lot of technique, rolling your hand on the table. If like you search YouTube videos for Trophier, it's hard to make. It's not an easy skill. And so, you know, they normally make it by machine now. Very rarely do you find it made by hand. And then it's dried and mass produced, so you can get a lot of it. You can make fresh Trophier at home. You're just not going to be able to buy fresh Trophier just about anywhere. And you'll rarely see Trophier on a menu. But this pesto Genovese in Liguria is always almost only served Trophier and pesto. The two together is like spaghetti and meatballs. Like it's just one of those things that like in that region, that's how you do it. And it's funny, like a lot of these dishes, like you can find like analogies and relations to that. It's like every Roman knows how to make carbonara, just like just about most Americans know how to make grilled cheese. It's one of those things that's like very synonymous to a late night meal to them is like a late night meal to us. So it's like you find dishes throughout cuisine and culture that everyone knows how to make in that particular region. In Liguria, it is Trophier and pesto without a doubt.
You do have a video of making Trophier on your Instagram.
On my Instagram, yeah. If you scroll back, I posted a while ago, you'll see a picture of little green, green, right?
Yes.
Green Trophiers. You'd see how they're made, and it's not an easy process. It's definitely a skill that takes some time to learn.
Yes, definitely.
So, shall we continue? We got two more.
Two more sauces.
Two more sauces. Technically three, but one kind of morphs into the other. So we're going with Pomodoro d'Oro, which is like a golden tomato sauce. The reason being is it has lots of olive oil and butter. Butter is not very traditional in pasta sauce at all. You don't find butter in a lot of Italian cooking, but butter is expensive. That's usually why they don't put it into a lot of their dishes. It's also olive oil. It's much more for the area. But if you've never had tomato sauce with butter in it, it's pretty magical. And so Pomodoro d'Oro starts as a herbaceous, flavorful, lots of herbs, dried herbs, tomatoes, garlic, onions, things like that then gets boosted up with the butter, which, if you look at what olive vodka is, it's a very similar sauce, just blended. So I thought these two could very much show you two different paths to get to a similar thing. Same thing here. We're going to, though, start with our olive oil. And this is quite a bit of olive oil for this dish. The reason being is we want to shallow fry our onions and garlic in the oil. You want enough room for them to move around to get just caramelized around the edges, but staying nice and soft and translucent in the center. So having enough oil and fat in the pan for them to move around and coat themselves is one of the tricks there. And then I have my sliced onions and garlic. My onions here, we're going for thick cut. Thick cut's important because if you're going with just pomodoro de oro and you're not turning this into alla vodka, you want to be able to remove the onions and garlic. And if you dice these all up, you're not going to be able to pull them out. So having a nice thick cut will allow you to easily remove all of the onion and garlic relieving whole, and the onion relieving thick. So then that way they all go in together and they can all come out together.
Yes, question. I noticed the recipe slightly changed on this one. If we plan to use sausage, should we brown that first?
No, so I took that out because I wasn't going to show the sausage. We're not using the sausage. It was optional. You could add sausage. Someone had asked me if they could add meat to this, and I was like, oh yeah, you totally could. And I put it on there. And then I was like, actually, you know what? That's a lot to show people with everything else we have going on. But if you plan on doing it, I'll show you when and how you would do that.
Not yet.
Not yet. You're going to always start with your onions and garlic and your oil. Good question. You caught me. I changed things. So, onions and garlic in the pan. We're going to get nice and sizzly. If you don't hear them sizzling, you want to turn your heat up a little bit. This is one of those ones we're going to use our senses. It's less so about like the exact temperature that we're cooking at. This isn't like it needs to be on medium heat, it needs to be on high heat. It needs to be on the heat in your kitchen, on your stove. That's going to allow them to sizzle and fry in that oil. You want to infuse the oil with all of the flavor of the onions and the garlic to really bring that all together. Now I also have the other ingredients here. All of my dried herbs together in the side. Those same herbs you can sometimes find in alla vodka sauce, sometimes you don't. If you're going straight for alla vodka and you don't want to put any of those dried herbs in there, that's okay. But I kind of find it's really nice to have that richer, more complex tomato sauce with something like alla vodka when you're kind of making a dish like that. I was reading and doing some research on alla vodka because that was probably the sauce that I knew the least about. You don't often see that in restaurants. And if you're looking at like Italian cuisine and things like that, Emilia-Romagna, one of the older regions of Italy, has, yes, before I go into it.
Yes, before you go into it, is this the first part of the recipe is the same as the alla vodka? And if so, when does it diverge?
Yes, they're the same right now, and I'll tell you when they diverge. We're staying the same. They're very similar, and then...
Just wanted to clarify.
Yes. So we're the same both ways here. All I was saying is that you chop up your onions small if you're making vodka. You leave them thick if you're doing pomodoro de oro. Pomodoro de oro doesn't keep the onions and garlic. Vodka keeps the onions and garlic. So a little bit of the same, a little bit of the difference. Emilia-Romagna, if you look up alla vodka recipes and sauces, it is not tomato based. It's actually a Moscow Russian style pasta dish with caviar, smoked salmon, and creme fraiche. And that's what alla vodka is because it has the vodka in there to play off the caviar, to play off the smoked salmon, and it is, as you could think, very Russian flavors using all of those together. But I thought it was really interesting, which then goes on to show that like alla vodka is almost like an Italian-American creation. Some people say it was a University of Columbia grad student that created the dish. Other people say it was like an Italian chef that owned a vodka company in Bologna and wanted to promote his vodka company, so started using that in pasta to kind of like popularize the entire dish. Either way, you could say it was made in the US, you could say it was made in Italy. It's pretty delicious. It's definitely one of those comfort foods. And so, I don't think it matters where it came from. It's fun to make. So we got all of our onions and garlic cooking down in here. We're getting nice brown caramelized around the edges and lots of fat in the pan. That's what's important. We got all of that fat. That's being infused with the onions and the garlic.
So again, it's probably half a cup of olive oil. oil?
Yes.
And fry the onions, garlic in it? Yeah.
Correct. Good, very good guesstimate. About a half a cup of oil to fry the onions and the garlic. Now, if you're adding your sausages, or if you want to do ground meat, or you want to turn this into like a meat-based sauce, pull out all of your onions and garlic. In which case, then you would sear your meat, keep your onions and garlic on the side, and then continue on with the rest of the dish once your meat is seared and crumbly or brown on all sides. If you're not going the route of the meat and you're just that one or two people that wanted to go meat, which is awesome, I applaud you, we'll continue on here. If you're making pomodoro de oro, you're going to pull out all of your onions and garlic and set them aside. They're no longer used for this recipe. They get to go on your next French toast scramble. They go on your pizza. They could go in your sandwiches. They could go in your next time you cook rice or in your soup or stock for dinner later. But they're not going back into the dish.
Or on a piece of bread right now.
Or on a piece of bread right now if you need a snack. That's totally acceptable as well. But if you're going to make vodka sauce, you're going to keep your onions and your garlic in the pan. To that, we're going to add our butter. The reason we didn't add our butter earlier is because we don't want the butter to brown, but we do want the fat and the flavor of the butter. And if we were to add the butter early on, it would end up browning with the onions and the garlic, and that we do not want. As soon as the butter melts, we're going to come in with all of our dried herbs right down into the pan. Dried herbs get nice and toasty in the butter. Oh man, that smells good.
So good.
Then we have tomato paste. Pomodoro de oro does not have the paste. You're just going just tomatoes in there. The reason why vodka uses both is because vodka is complex. There's a lot of flavors going on there. Vodka is kind of one of those things where if you just had plain tomatoes, it's not going to be as balanced. But using the tomato paste is going to allow you to get this rich, complex, really deep, savory tomato notes. Plus you get that fresh kind of like acidic sweetness that comes from crushed tomatoes. So you kind of need both. It's hard to do the recipe with just one. So tomato paste first into all of that fat. I like to start with a tomato paste because tomato paste is one of those things that almost like spices. It benefits from being toasted in the fat before adding anything else. Anytime I use tomato paste, I always add it straight to the fat first and then bring on whatever other ingredients or components I have. Once that gets nice and toasty, we'll come in with our crushed tomatoes. And then a little bit of salt. Turn down your pan so it doesn't bubble up on you. Tomato bubbles, be careful if you have a very hot pan. And then same thing here, if you want to add a little bit of sugar, I'm not going to stop you. Depending on the variety of tomatoes you have, you might need a little sugar. Just depends on how sweet your tomatoes are. We're going to let this start to cook down. As soon as this comes back up to a simmer, I'm going to come in with my cream. You don't often find cream in a lot of Italian pasta dishes. It's rich, it's heavy, it's expensive. Usually they'll save it for desserts or really luxurious dishes. This is a pretty luxurious dish, so we're going to go in with our cream, bring the whole thing up to a simmer. At the same time, we're going to think about our blender that we're going to need to bring it all together. This is a blended dish. You don't have to use a blender by any means. If you have one of those hand stick emulsion blenders, that works. But sometimes I find that leaves this a little chunky, which you obviously don't want it chunky. So if you have a blender, if you don't mind getting it out, I like blending this, and that kind of ends up with a super creamy, nice, rich sauce. Questions so far?
There's just one. When do we start cooking the pasta? But you haven't gotten there yet.
Haven't gotten there yet. We're close.
Very close.
We're very close. So I'm going to use bucatini for this one. But you can use penne. I think penne alla vodka might be like one of the most popular dishes, I guess you could say. Like, I feel like when you say alla vodka, it's penne alla vodka, right?
Typically in America, vodka.
And yeah, well, we're talking about this is an American dish, right? Where else are you gonna find it? So now that's coming to a boil. I have my blender ready to go to catch that. I'm gonna drop my pasta. I know my pasta takes about 9 minutes or so. So we're getting close to the end. Pasta in the water. We're not gonna forget about it. I'm gonna set a timer.
For the pomodoro de oro, take the onions out before adding the tomatoes.
Yes.
Yes.
Take the onions out when I said to take the onions out. As soon as they're brown, then add your spices, add your meat, add your tomatoes. Continue to simmer as you cook the pasta.
For the pomodoro de oro.
For the pomodoro de oro, you're leaving your onions and garlic in for the vodka.
Yes.
Similar but different. Similar but different. So bring this up to a boil. Next, the timing of this is kind of thought out. Fortunately for us, there have been some food scientists, chefs, cooks, people obsessed with penne alla vodka that have done lots and lots of research and recipe testing and development to see how much vodka and when to add the vodka to the recipe for the best results. Universally, people have agreed and seen that 7 minutes is a good cook time for a vodka before you get the most of the vodka flavor without any of that harshness. Any more and you kind of lose that vodka flavor. Any less and it doesn't really cook off all of those harsh aromatic compounds that you'll find in vodka. This is the time when you want to use a good vodka. You do taste the notes that vodka has, and so if you're using something very harsh or that you wouldn't necessarily want to drink on its own, it's not going to be very good in your sauce. So do yourself a favor and use a nice vodka. This is like a handlebar vodka, which I thought was very appropriate for me. So it was gifted to me. I don't know where it's made. I think it's made in LA, perhaps. San Francisco, Handlebar Spirits. I was close, California. I just thought it was cute because I have a handlebar mustache and it was handlebar vodka, and that's why someone gave it to me. And I think it's perfect to make on a dish like today. So this is coming all together. We have reached up to a simmer here. Everything coming together as one. We're gonna go into our blender. Please be careful not to splash on yourself or your friends.
Pasta water for anything?
In the restaurant, we save pasta water. We make pasta stock. And like when I'm cooking dinners and stuff like that, I'll make pasta stock, which is like dried pasta in water that you could use that stock throughout service. So it's like unseasoned. At home, no need to save pasta water for anything. I can't think of any uses or what you would end up doing with it. I couldn't think why you would need starchy water at home. No reason to save that. Let me check on our bucatini back here, give everybody a nice stir. Make sure it's not sticking together. That's great. We're gonna blend this till it's nice and smooth. What you end up with is this beautiful rosé orange sauce. I'm gonna just put enough back into my pan because I don't need the full batch for how much I made.
And then do you blend before or after cooking the vodka?
I have not added the vodka yet. We blend and then we add our vodka and continue to cook. The amount of vodka is about 1/4 cup per quart of sauce. I have probably 1/2 quart of sauce here, so I'm going to go 1/4 cup. Bring this back up to a simmer and let that cook down and the vodka cook off. At which point, my pasta's getting close. As soon as my pasta's done, I'm going to add it to my sauce, bring the two together, and let the pasta cook with the vodka and the sauce together all as one. Do this last stage of cooking. It does get a little bubbly on you because it's a thick cream-based sauce, so just be careful. This isn't one you're going to want to walk away from, otherwise you're going to end up with splatters and bubbles all over your stove, which is obviously no fun. Nobody wants that. But you do want this at a simmer. You want it to reduce just a touch and to come together.
Who gave you the Indelar vodka?
I don't remember. I feel really bad.
I think it was.
Was it Peter?
I think it was a gift from a dinner, actually.
A dinner house cooking?
Yeah, but last year.
That sounds about right.
Yes, I think it was a gift from a diner when Chef Joe.
Yeah, one of the guests came to dinner.
Before COVID.
Pre-COVID.
Yes.
Feels like a lifetime ago.
Yes.
Back when I was actually cooking for people instead of with people. Yeah, I think someone brought vodka in. I don't drink very often, if at all, and so I use most of my alcohol and things for cooking. So that's why it's still around. So I'm not making all the vodka very often, and vodka is like I use it in like tempura batter. But other than that, it doesn't get used too often in my house. So, but nonetheless, I keep it. Guests might want some vodka or something sometime. When we have guests, obviously not anytime recently. And this is coming together. Let's give it a little tasty taste. This is an interesting one. If like you taste right at the beginning, as soon as you add the vodka, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Where you're like, whoa, that's intense. Yeah, that's intense. But then as this starts to cook, that flavor really mellows out, and like the beauty and essence of the dish kind of starts to shine.
Just curious, why do you use the smallest little spatulas?
That harks back to like my line cooking days in the restaurant, and like the reason being is like a good example. What I have while we wait for this to cook, is like you have like your spoon bane that you keep all your tools in on your station when you're cooking, right? And so like these really big spatulas are great for like at home, but like in a restaurant, that's like a really big thing sticking out of your bane that's like kind of obnoxious. And so you have these little tiny ones, which are like the same size as your spoons. And then you could have these in your bane, and it's much more compact and neat and small. And so like I have tons of these little tiny spatulas, and I'm just like super accustomed to using them. Like I reach for those before I reach for a big spatula, and that's just because that's what I've always used. And I think it's one of those like kind of muscle memory things. But that's a really funny, silly question.
Is it so bad that this is one of the things I'm grateful for COVID for? Oh, that's so nice.
That's really sweet.
That's really, really nice.
Yeah, I mean, I would never say I'm grateful for COVID, but I'm very grateful to be able to teach and share everyone during this time. And I hope to continue to do this. I mean, it'd be really fun to do this like in person too in the future when that is safe.
Yeah.
I think that would be really, really cool.
When it's safe. Hopefully sometime next year, right?
Yeah.
If we're making the pomodoro, when do you add the fresh basil?
So you're making the pomodoro. I add the fresh basil right before I add the pasta. So you let the residual heat from the pasta and the sauce come all together and toss it together as one. Let me see where we're at here. I think we're very close on our bucatini. Oh yeah, we're looking pretty good. Don't throw your noodles at the wall and see if they stick. I don't know where that came from. Nice chew. I'd say about 80% cooked, which is exactly where we want to be. And I'm actually going to...
Yes, Chef?
I want to use these noodles for the next one too. Because I cooked twice the amount of noodles, and I'm going to do these noodles again. And rather than waiting for them to cook, I have them done. So we're going to cheat a little bit. We're going to cheat for the last one. So I'm going to grab everything here. I'm going to land them on this tray. And because they're so far undercooked, al dente, as you would say, everybody's coming out of the pot.
And then typically, people at home would just put it right into their
Colander.
Yes.
That thing that catches all of the all the noodles as they pour it into the sink, right? But I'm doing it the difficult way, pulling out one noodle at a time with my tweezers. And of course, whoever called me out, I'm using little tiny tweezers too, by the way. Fun stuff, huh? So I'm gonna go about half my noodles here into my vodka sauce. We've been cooking our vodka sauce for about 5 minutes. We got about 2 more minutes left on it, which is actually perfect timing for our noodles to finish cooking in there. Swirling and twirling. Oh, it smells so good. Bringing this all together. And then this one as well, right as it starts to tighten up, right at the end, before we go to the plate, I got my super finely grated cheese. We're gonna go right in, toss, toss, toss. And we're making magic, people. We are making, hold on, right there, making magic. And we're coming up right on the 7-minute mark. The pasta has about the 2 minutes to finish cooking in the pan. I got a little bit of that pasta water coming in here with it, just to keep everybody happy. That starchy pasta water really is kind of like the secret ingredient when it comes to making most of these sauces, is not over seasoning your pasta water, so that way you can use it to create a beautiful and stable starchy emulsion. And then you can see as this starts to cook, it tightens. And you can tell how much it's tightening by it creates a streak in the bottom of the pan, like right there. And it doesn't come together. That means you're very, very close. The noodles have sucked up most of that sauce. It's not as soupy or saucy as it once was. And then I say right like where you're able to kind of pull a piece of the pan back and you can see the bottom and it doesn't come together. That means I have a nice amount of sauce there. When I can add my cheese, all of this extra sauce is just gonna get melted and come together. Agitate, toss. We've turned off the heat now. And this is the same exact thing you'd be doing with the pomodoro de oro. Except you have your basil in here. You finish it the same exact way. And if you want to add another knob of butter and make it extra rich and creamy, I would do that. I recommend you do that. You do like a Gordon Ramsay knob of butter, which no one really knows what it is, but it's a knob, you know, a knob.
We had a question about, will you teach how to make those big noodles you put the pesto on? And I let everybody know one of the next classes is pappardelle and beef balls.
That's
in December.
right. That's gonna be a fun one. So we're going here, bucatini, coming down in the pan. Oh man, that looks so good. I'm so happy with this one. I think this is the one I want to eat too. I'm gonna eat both of them. We're gonna go a little bit more cheese on top. More cheese, more better. And everybody thinks, I just want to point out here, they're like, oh man, all these pastas always just get topped with cheese. Don't they ever put any other garnishes? When you're using really good cheese, like Parmigiano Reggiano or Pecorino Romano, they're more than just cheese. You think of them as like a finishing salt or finishing olive oil. There's umami, there's acidity, there's saltiness. There are all of those things that you would normally finish a dish with, but like in one product. And it's a product that is world renowned coming from this country. So they're very proud to use it. It makes sense to use it. It kind of elevates and refreshes a lot of those flavors and builds upon what's already in the dish. So as long as you're using that good quality stuff, it actually makes sense to finish most of these dishes with that same cheese. And we end up with this beautiful, oh my goodness. So good. So, so good. Bucatini alla vodka, my friends.
Yes.
And one more.
One more.
And I saved this one for the end on purpose. Aglio e olio. Sometimes the simplest things are often the hardest. There's a phrase or saying that first, I was reading this in an Italian cookbook somewhere, that like first God created man and woman. It was like the first thing he did. Some people say in that same book that God created olive oil and garlic, which for pasta in that same book, goes on to point out that olive oil and garlic was never originally used with pasta. So that kind of crumbles that entire phrase and saying all together at one. But at the same time, oil and garlic has become a base for just about every other pasta sauce, with so many endless possibilities in those two ingredients. The way you treat them often then dictates how it all comes together. So we have our garlic here first. Large, wide pan. I prefer a wide pan for this one. So to me, this does kind of make a difference because it gives you room to kind of emulsify things, for things to happen and to come together. So I chose my widest pan for this one at the end because I'm also using the bucatini, which is a wide, long noodle. So I want lots of room to make this happen. We're going to start with our olive oil here in the pan. And we're going with a lower heat. You could almost say like a cold pan. And we want to bring this up from cold with our super thinly sliced garlic. I can't stress this enough. We want this garlic slice as thin as you can get it. And what I mean by that is like whether you need to use a razor like on Goodfellas or a mandolin or a really sharp knife. But we're going for razor thin for two reasons. Thin garlic is going to cook differently, it's going to infuse flavors differently, and it's going to eat differently than thickly cut or chopped garlic. So I think it's very important. Take the time, do yourself a favor, thinly slice your garlic nicely. So in our coldish pan, and I'm going to go for a wider, longer spatula for whoever was watching.
Just a question. I had this question from the beginning. I didn't use any olive oil in the pasta water. I typically throw a dash along with salt. What do you think?
So that's one of those things. I'm glad you someone asked that, because I always like to kind of debunk that myth. I never add oil to pasta water. I don't know where that came from. Oil and water don't mix. So by adding oil to pasta water, all you're doing is putting oil on top of the water, and it just floats there like an oil spill. None of that actually comes with you when you cook the pasta. It doesn't stop anybody from sticking because the pasta is all down here and the oil's all the way up here in the pot. So things are still going to stick regardless. And then you end up adding oil when you pull pasta water to your sauce. And you don't always want oil in your sauce. There might already be oil there. You're using the water to emulsify, and by having another fat floating on top, it's going to become much harder to use the starchy water as an emulsification agent. And so I urge people to not do that. I don't think there's a reason to do that. There's no science behind doing that. I just don't see any benefits to it. So I think you could stop, just like everyone's going to stop salting their pasta water, salty like the sea. We don't need to add oil to our pasta water either. Save yourself some oil. No need. If you're worried about your pasta sticking, it means you need a little more water in your pan or a higher burner. Because if the pasta just sinks to the bottom and sits, it's going to stick. And that's what sometimes ends up happening. So, we're a little bit behind, but that was just because of our pause in the middle. Don't worry, this is the last thing. We're just about there. We are slowly melting all of this garlic into the oil. Our pasta, the bucatini in this case, is in the back. This process, it needs to happen very gently and slowly. If it happens too quickly, you're going to end up crisping the outside of the garlic, and you're going to end up with like that bitter, pungent garlic flavor rather than that soft, smooth, subtle garlic flavor. So we want to cook these down. We want to melt them. We want to soften them. We want to make them nice and translucent, but we want it to happen from cold up slowly and not too quickly. And that's why it's important to have these thinly sliced pieces so they all cook evenly, so they melt down into the oil. And then at this point, you could decide aglio e olio e peperoncino is oil, garlic, and crushed red pepper flakes or black pepper. Totally up to you if you want to take that extra liberty and add those in as well. I've also seen like versions of this that has like a dried herb blend, like things like dried parsley, dried basil, maybe fennel pollen, oregano. All work really well. You could finish this with a little bit of cheese or parsley, a little lemon juice, but you're all kind of like then getting away from this original dish. And so this is a great one if you're like, you're a cook, you're out there, you're trying to like understand emulsifying pasta sauces. This is one of those ones that like is gonna drive you crazy until you finally get it. And then you're going to be able to take that skill and use it on any time you're trying to emulsify pasta sauce. Because emulsifying an oil-based sauce is hard. You need starchy water. You need proper temperature management. It can't be too much oil. It can't be too much water. It can't be not enough water. Otherwise, you're going to break your emulsion if it gets too hot, if it gets too cold. So it's all about kind of like watching the pan, getting just the right heat, and then serving it right away. It's not a very stable emulsion. No matter how much starchy water you have, as this sits, whether it's in a bowl, on the table, it'll eventually leak out that oil. And so, just like all pasta, it's one of those things you want to serve right away. As soon as you see that the garlic starts to get sizzly, that means most of the water now has evaporated, and we're very close to the garlic starting to fry. I'm going to kick up my heat. And right before the garlic starts to fry, because I don't want any of that fried garlic flavor. That's not what I'm going for. I don't want brown garlic flavor. I'm going to grab this starchy pasta water and a cup to grab it from. And I also saved this one for last because now I have really starchy pasta water. And I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 ladles. That's about 6 ounces of water into the garlic. As soon as it hits the garlic water, it smells so good. How good does that smell, Bella?
So good.
So good. Now I'm going to take my 80% cooked bucatini here. I'm going to pretend this came right out of the pasta pot. I didn't put any oil on it, so it's sticking slightly, but that's okay. As soon as it hits the pan, it's going to loosen back up. The pan's also hot, so be careful, don't hurt your fingers. And then we're just going to agitate this, swirl and twirl until this all comes together. Tiny bit of salt. You do have that salty water in there, so you might not need much, but I sometimes think you do need a little more since this is such a simple dish. And then it's this swirling, much like you're making aioli or salad dressing or anything that's emulsified, hollandaise. It takes agitation. So the heat, this agitation and swirling, and then as the water starts to evaporate, the sauce is going to tighten up and thicken itself, and that starchiness is going to coat the pasta. And sometimes it takes a minute, sometimes it takes 2. And if you notice, you miss that point where the water completely evaporates and then you end up with just oil and noodles. Grab some more water from the pot and go right back into the pan. So this is why I like having a wide pan for this. Gives you lots of room to maneuver and things to emulsify. Oh, and then you can see it starts to get nice and creamy. I'm going to add just a little more water, give me a little more time to show you guys. And you can see if you like missed that point where it's like, oh my gosh, it broke. It's separated back into oil and noodle again. And we're just going to get a little more water in there. My noodle needed a little more time to cook anyway. And then as this starts to come together, you guys can see it happen in real time. Agitation, swirly twirly. Is anyone making this one? I'm super curious. I wanted to do it because it was like one of those ones that like people probably wouldn't want to learn how to make, but at the same time is like the classics, the simple things. The less ingredients you have, the harder it is to cook.
Well, it's probably very easy for some people. Like, oh, what pasta should I make tonight? Here you go.
This is a good one. It comes together in like 10 minutes. Right after Joel Robuchon passed away, like a quote of his, you know, circled the internet of like the simplest things are often the hardest. The less ingredients you have, the harder it is to cook. And I think this is like a perfect example of that. And you can see here now, it's a nice creamy sauce. It's coating just the bottom of the pan. All those noodles, there's no cheese, there's no butter. This is just the olive oil, the garlic, and that starchy water from all of the pasta. Probably gonna give this 30 more seconds just to tighten up a touch. Doing my little check where I'll drag the spatula through the pan. And it'll tell me if the sauce is ready to come together or not. Nice and creamy. Oh, it's like magic. Like when you finally see this done for the first time and you do it yourself and it happens before your eyes and you get this like really creamy, rich sauce that just coats all of the noodles. It's like not two separate things. It comes together as one.
Thoughts on anchovies in this dish?
Anchovies would be really good in this dish. It would be another dish entirely by a different name. But anchovies would be absolutely stellar. I'd probably go with like a little bit of lemon, parsley in there as well. But like,
add it, Emily. Yeah.
That's a really good call. Check this out. So I hope you guys can see how creamy this is just from the oil and the pasta water. Like absolutely divine. Coating all of the noodles, not like a pool of sauce down on the bottom that just kind of like is wet and soupy. Not at all. Like when you do this right and everything comes together, it's really this magical, special dish. And that's it. We did it. We cooked all the way to the end. What was that? Eight different pastas at least? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 pastas, 6 different pastas, 8 different sauces. Whew, what an afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining in. I appreciate all of you so much. I love you all. Thank you for everything.
Where are the red pepper flakes?
Red pepper flakes. That was an optional ingredient. I don't like it. This is like the original version. You could do, I said, aglio e olio e peperoncino would be the red pepper flakes. If you wanted to add the red pepper flakes, you would have added them when they were toasting the garlic. I'm sorry if you missed that. But I just kept the 2 ingredients, the super classic. Continue on questions as they come in. We got a couple minutes. I'm sorry we went 22 minutes over. I'm sorry some of you got the wrong message from Chef's feed regarding the stream. I'm going to re-upload this afterwards and send it out to everyone again. You all should get the messages from me too directly. Hopefully you're all getting those that have like the links. I try to send it out multiple times leading up to the event just in case you miss one email. Maybe you'll see the second or third or fourth. And then that way nobody's left behind in the dust. We have December classes are live. We're doing rotolo, which is like a fancy rolled up lasagna and fresh ricotta cheese. If you've never made ricotta cheese, oh my gosh, we got to do that together.
And we had a question about that one. Do you recommend having a pasta machine for that one?
For that one, I recommend having a pasta machine. It's going to be harder to do. I'm not going to demonstrate how to do it by hand, but I'm going to do the following class, the meatball class with the egg noodle. We're going to do that one without any pasta machine. We're going to do that one rolled out.
But for also the rotolo class, if you'd like, you can get pre-made lasagna sheets too.
Or you use pre-made lasagna sheets and you skip making the dough altogether and save yourself an hour.
But you can still make the rotolo, like the...
You can still make the filling, you can still make the ricotta, you can still make up the rotolo all the same way. Make the same dish with store-bought dried pasta sheets.
Yes.
Great call. That's why we have Bella.
And then the next one would be the meatballs.
And then after that is the meatball and egg dough. We're doing egg dough shapes, pappardelle, farfalle, garganelle, tagliatelle, and we're going to do it all rolled out by hand, kneading by hand. We're not going to bother with the machine. I know people don't have the machine. And so this is for all of you out there, finished with mozzarella stuffed meatballs. Mamma mia.
Thanks everyone again.
Thank you everyone again. Sorry for the confusion.
About the links.
Shout out to Bella for the chat room support and everything. Don't forget to tag me on Instagram. And if you're still here, hit that subscribe button. Subscribe to this channel on YouTube because once I have over 1,000 subscribers, it unlocks abilities on YouTube for streaming and making this better for all of us. So let's jump up there. Let's try to just get over that 1,000 mark for streaming purposes. I would appreciate that. I try to upload YouTube content, but most of my stuff's on Instagram. I'm getting there. Thank you everyone for being here. Any other questions before we go? And then I have 6 bowls of pasta to eat.
Well, we're gonna social distance drop to our neighbor, Chef. No.
Oh, I'm not gonna get to eat them all.
Any questions, everyone? This one's a little different, this class.
Yeah, a little different. We're in the kitchen. We're out of the pasta lab. So things are different today. But yeah. I had fun. I hope all of you had fun. Thank you for hanging in there.
Yeah, and then don't forget the taco emoji.
And don't forget the taco emoji. Thank you. Yes, if you're new here and you haven't done a class before and you have a question that you didn't think of right now or a question about cooking in the future, shoot me a message on Instagram. Use the taco emoji in your message and it'll be our little secret that we're best friends and we hung out this afternoon, that you're on the Inside Pasta Party crew, and I'll get back to you with a more detailed and prompt answer versus some other DM that might just happen to accidentally get lost. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
there was a question about making mozzarella maybe in January.
Mozzarella is hard. I've thought about doing a mozzarella class. You have to be able to get fresh mozzarella curd and unpasteurized. And so that, I mean, even as a chef, that's a hard product to find consistently, depending on where you live in the country. There's a really great Caputo Brothers makes mozzarella out of the East Coast. I want to say New York, but I could be wrong. One of the East Coast states up there. They ship, but that's like, I don't know. It's a hard thing to get a hand of like fresh mozzarella curd to be able to make it. But I've thought about it, if I could come up with a good solution. But I think we're going to do a pizza class. Maybe focaccia, who knows? We'll see. We'll see. Stay tuned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. All right, that's it.
You know where to find us.
You know where to find us. Peace out, everyone. We love you. Thank you.